Hey friends, about 70% of folks watching my videos aren't subscribed. If you enjoy these stories, consider subscribing. It really helps the channel grow. Drop a like, leave a comment, and let me know where you're tuning in from. The harsh fluorescent lights of the ranger station buzzed overhead as I nursed my second cup of coffee, grimacing at its bitter taste. It was barely 7 a.m. and the Daniel Boone National Forest was still shrouded in early morning mist. I'm Lane Brooks, and I've been a park ranger here for nearly 2 decades. Most people think my job is all about yelling at litter bugs and giving directions to lost tourists. If only it were that simple. The truth is, these woods hold secrets. They're dark, twisted things that most folks can't even imagine, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to that fateful day in 2011 when everything I thought I knew about these forests changed forever. I just finished scrolling through the night's reports on my ancient desktop computer. Nothing out of the ordinary. A couple of noise complaints from the campgrounds. A minor injury from some kid who'd taken a tumble on one of the easier trails. Standard stuff. I was just about to head out for my morning patrol when the phone rang. Daniel Boone National Forest, Ranger Brooks speaking. I answered, stifling a yawn. The voice on the other end belonged to Sheriff Holt, and something in his tone immediately set me on edge. Lane, we've got a situation. 2 hikers, Megan Reeves and Tyler Chen, were supposed to meet their friends at Chimney Top Rock Trailhead yesterday evening. They never showed. I felt a knot forming in my stomach. Missing hikers weren't uncommon, but something about this felt different. Any sign of them on the trail cams? That's the thing, Holt replied, his voice tight. They were last seen heading out on that old unmarked trail near Hollow Creek, you know the one. I did know it. It was a trail that didn't show up on any official maps, the kind of place only seasoned hikers or locals would know about. It snaked through some of the most remote and treacherous parts of the forest. Alright, I said, already reaching for my pack. They'll head out there now. Tell Search and Rescue to stand by. As I geared up, my partner Jim sauntered in, looking annoyingly chipper for this ungodly hour. Morning, sunshine. What's got you all riled up? I filled him in as we headed to the truck. Jim's usual grin faded as he listened. That old trail by Hollow Creek? Man, I hate that place. Always gives me the creeps. I nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. There was something about that part of the forest that just felt wrong. Like the trees were watching you, waiting for you to make a mistake. As we drove towards the trailhead, the mist began to lift, revealing the vast expanse of green that stretched as far as the eye could see. To most people, it was breathtakingly beautiful, but I knew better. I knew what those woods could hide. We parked at the official trailhead and started our hike towards the unmarked path. The forest was unusually quiet. The only sound was the crunch of leaves and twigs beneath our boots. So Jim said, breaking the silence, "You think these kids just got lost, or are we dealing with something else?" I considered his question carefully. I don't know, Jim, but I've got a bad feeling about this one. Little did I know that feeling was just the beginning. As we pushed deeper into the forest towards that godforsaken trail, I couldn't shake the sense that we were walking into something far worse than a simple rescue mission. The trees seemed to close in around us, their branches reached out like gnarled fingers. A crow caught in the distance echoed ominously through the woods. And somewhere, deep in the shadows of this ancient forest, something was waiting. Our real nightmare was about to begin. As we approached the unmarked trail, the forest seemed to grow denser and more oppressive. The canopy overhead blocked out most of the sunlight, casting everything in a gloomy green-tinged twilight. I could feel Jim's unease radiating off him in waves. You ever wonder why they don't put this trail on the maps? He asked. His voice barely above a whisper. I shrugged, trying to keep my own apprehension in check, probably to keep tourists away. This area is not exactly safe for casual hikers. We began our trek down the narrow path, our eyes scanning the surrounding forest for any sign of the missing hikers. The trail was overgrown, barely visible in some places. It was clear that not many people came this way. After about an hour of hiking, we came across the first sign that something was amiss. A torn backpack hung from a low branch, its contents scattered across the forest floor. I approached it cautiously, my hand instinctively moving to the holster at my hip. Lane, Jim called out, his voice strained. "You need to see this." I turned to see him crouched near a large oak tree, examining something on the ground. As I moved closer, I saw what had caught his attention. Deep gouges moored the tree's trunk, too large and too high to have been made by any animal native to these woods. What the hell could have done that? Jim asked, his earlier bravado completely gone. I shook my head, unable to provide an answer. I don't know, but we need to keep moving. Those hikers might still be out here. We pressed on, the forest growing quieter with each step. Even the birds had fallen silent, as if they too sensed the wrongness that permeated the air. The trail led us deeper into a ravine, the walls of rock on either side making me feel increasingly claustrophobic. It was then that we heard it, a low, guttural sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Jim and I froze, our eyes meeting in shared terror. "Please tell me that was your stomach," Jim said, his attempted humor falling flat. Before I could respond, a scream pierced the air, high-pitched and filled with unimaginable fear. It echoed through the ravine, sending a chill down my spine. "Move!" I yelled, breaking into a run toward the source of the sound. Jim was right behind me, our training kicking in despite the fear that threatened to overwhelm us. We rounded a bend in the trail and skidded to a halt. There, in a small clearing, was a scene straight out of a nightmare. Blood painted the ground and surrounding trees, and in the center lay a mangled form that I could barely recognize as human. Jim turned away, retching into the underbrush. I forced myself to approach, my heart pounding in my chest. As I got closer, I realized with horror that this wasn't just a body, it was parts of a body. Limbs were twisted at impossible angles, the chest cavity torn open. I keyed my radio with shaking hands. "Dispatch, this is Ranger Brooks. We've got a situation. Send backup in the corner to my location and tell them to hurry." As I waited for a response, my eyes were drawn to something at the edge of the clearing. There, half hidden in the shadows, was a set of tracks unlike anything I'd ever seen before. They were massive, easily twice the size of a bear's, with long claw-like protrusions at the end of each toe. Jim, I called out my voice hoarse. "We need to go, now." He looked up at me, his face pale. "What about the other hiker?" I glanced back at the gruesome scene behind us. For their sake, I hope they are already dead. As we hastily made our way back up the trail, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The forest, once so familiar, now felt alien and hostile. Whatever had done this was still out there, and I had a sinking feeling that our nightmare was far from over. The trek back to our vehicle was a blur of paranoia and adrenaline. Every snapping twig, every rustle of leaves sent our hearts racing. By the time we reached the Ranger truck, both Jim and I were drenched in sweat, our nerves frayed to the breaking point. I radioed in our position and requested immediate backup. Within an hour, the quiet trailhead had transformed into a bustling command center. Sheriff Holt arrived with a team of deputies, their faces grim as Jim and I recounted what we found. "Jesus Christ," Holt muttered, running a hand through his thinning hair. "You're sure it wasn't a bear attack?" I shook my head vehemently. No bear I've ever seen could do damage like that. In those tracks, there was something else entirely. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the forest, a decision was made. We'd formed search parties at First Light to comb the area for the remaining hiker and whatever had caused this carnage. Part of me wanted to argue, to insist we go in now, but I know it would be suicide to enter those woods at night. That night was the longest of my life. I tossed and turned in my bunk at the ranger station, my mind replaying the horrific scene we discovered when I finally did manage to drift off. My dreams were filled with shadowy creatures and agonized screams. Dawn broke, pale and hazy, as we gathered at the trailhead. The search party consisted of rangers, deputies, and a few seasoned local hunters who knew these woods like the backs of their hand. As we divided into teams, I couldn't help but notice the fear in everyone's eyes. They'd all heard the rumors by now, whispers of something inhuman stalking the forest. Jim and I were paired with Deputy Rodriguez and one of the hunters, an older man who introduced himself simply as Gus. As we set off down the trail, Gus regaled us with local legends about the forest. My granddaddy used to tell stories, he said. His voice low and gravelly, he said these woods were sacred to the old tribes, that they performed rituals here. Open doorways to other worlds, doorways that sometimes let things through. Rodriguez scoffed, "Come on, man, we don't need that superstitious bullshit right now." But I wasn't so quick to dismiss the old man's words. After what I'd seen yesterday, I was ready to believe just about anything. We were making for about 2 hours when Gus suddenly held up a hand, signaling us to stop. He crouched down, examining something on the forest floor that I couldn't see. "Tracks," he murmured. "Fresh ones, and big." My heart began to race as I joined him. Sure enough, there were the same massive prints we'd seen yesterday, leading off into the underbrush. "We should radio this in," Rodriguez said, reaching for his walkie-talkie. But before he could make the call, a blood-curdling shriek echoed through the trees. It was close, too close, and filled with a mixture of pain and terror that made my blood run cold. "That's gotta be the other hiker," Jim said, his face pale. Without thinking, I took off in the direction of the scream, my training overriding my fear. I could hear the others crashing through the brush behind me, but I didn't slow down. Someone needed our help, and every second counted. As I burst into a small clearing, I skidded to a halt, my eyes struggling to process the scene before me. There, at the base of a massive oak tree, was a young woman, presumably the missing hiker. She was alive, but barely. Her clothes torn and bloody. Mobbing over her, its massive form blocking out the sun, was something that defied description. It was vaguely humanoid, but much larger. Its body covered in a patchwork of fur and scales. Its head swiveled toward me, revealing a face that was a nightmarish blend of human and animal features, with eyes that glowed with an otherworldly intelligence. For a moment, time seemed to stand still as we stared at each other. Then, with a roar that shook the very ground, the creature lunged toward me. The hunt had begun, and I had a sickening feeling that we were no longer the hunters, but the prey. The world narrowed to a pinpoint as the creature charged. My body moved on autopilot, diving to the side just as massive claws raked the air where I'd been standing. I rolled to my feet, drawing my sidearm in one fluid motion. "Get the girl!" I shouted to the others as they burst into the clearing. Jim and Rodriguez rushed toward the injured hiker while Gus raised his hunting rifle. The sound of gunfire filled the air as we opened fire on the monster, but our bullets seemed to have little effect, merely enraging it further. It let out another ear-splitting roar and turned its attention to Jim and Rodriguez, who were attempting to lift the semi-conscious woman. "Hey!" I yelled, desperate to draw its focus. "Over here, you ugly son of a bitch!" It worked. The creature's head snapped toward me, its eyes burning with an intelligence that sent a chill down my spine. This was no mindless beast. There was something calculating in its gaze, something almost human. As it charged toward me again, I emptied my clip into its chest. Blood spurted from the wounds, but it didn't slow down. At the last second, I dove to the side again, feeling the rush of air as its massive form barreled past me. I scrambled to my feet, my gun clicking empty as I tried to fire again. The creature turned, its mouth opening to reveal rows of razor-sharp teeth. This was it, I thought. This is how I die. But then Gus' voice rang out, clear and strong. "Hey, you overgrown freak, remember me?" The old hunter stood his ground as the monster's attention shifted. In his hands was not his rifle, but something that looked like an old Native American totem, intricately carved and painted. The effect on the creature was immediate and startling. It recoiled as if struck, letting out a high-pitched key that was more terrifying than its roars. Before our astonished eyes, it turned and fled into the forest, crashing through the underbrush with incredible speed. For a moment, we all stood in stunned silence. Then the adrenaline wore off and the pain hit. My side was on fire where the creature's claws had grazed me, and I could feel warm blood soaking through my shirt. Lying there, Jim called out, snapping me back to reality. "We need to get out of here now." I nodded, moving to help with the injured hiker. She was in bad shape, covered in cuts and bruises. Her leg bent at an unnatural angle, but she was alive. And right now, that was a miracle in itself. As we began our arduous journey back to the trailhead, I couldn't help but glance at Gus. The old man's face was set in grim determination. The strange totem still clutched tightly in his hand. "What the hell was that thing?" I asked him, my voice hoarse. Gus shook his head slowly. "Something that shouldn't be here, something that was locked away a long time ago." He met my gaze, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and resolve. "And now, it's loose again." The walk back was tense, every sound in the forest making us jump. By the time we reached the command center, I was lightheaded from blood loss, and the injured hiker had lapsed into unconsciousness. The next few hours were a blur of medical attention, debriefings, and frantic phone calls. The official story was already being crafted, a bear attack. Tragic, but not unheard of. But those of us who had seen the truth knew better. As night fell once again, I found myself sitting alone on the steps of the ranger station, my mind reeling from the day's events. Jim joined me, handing me a steaming cup of coffee. So, he said after a long moment of silence, "What do we do now?" I took a sip of the bitter liquid, wincing as the movement pulled at my freshly stitched wounds. "We go back out there," I replied, my voice low but firm. "Whatever that thing is, it's still out there, and we need to stop it before it kills again." Jim nodded slowly, his usual joking demeanor nowhere to be seen. "You know they're not going to believe us, right?" "Hell, I'm not sure I believe it. And I saw the damn thing." "I know," I sighed, "but we can just sit back and do nothing. Not now that we know what's out there." As we sat there, the weight of our newfound knowledge settling heavily on our shoulders, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The creature was still out there, hidden in the depths of the forest, and something told me it wasn't done with us yet. The hunt wasn't over, it had only just begun. The next few days passed in a haze of heightened security measures and hushed conversations. The official story of a bear attack had been released to the public, but those of us who knew the truth couldn't shake the feeling of impending doom that hung over the forest like a shroud. I spent most of my time researching, digging through old archives and local folklore for any mention of similar incidents. Jim thought I was obsessing, but I couldn't let it go. The image of that creature, its impossible form and intelligent eyes, was burned into my memory. It was during one of these late-night research sessions that I received an unexpected visitor. A soft knock on the door of my office startled me from my reading. "Come in." I called out, expecting to see Jim or one of the other rangers. Instead, it was Gus who entered, his weathered face grave in the dim light of my desk lamp. Without a word, he placed the strange totem he had used in the forest on my desk. "I think it's time you knew the whole truth, son," he said, his voice low and serious. For the next hour, Gus spun a tale that sounded more like fantasy than reality. He spoke of ancient tribal rituals, doorways between worlds, and guardians tasked with keeping those doorways sealed. The totem, he explained, was one of the keys to those doorways and to the creatures that sometimes slip through. My family has protected these woods for generations, Gus said, his eyes distant. We thought we sealed all the doorways years ago, but something's changed. Something's weakened the barriers. I sat back in my chair, my mind reeling. Part of me wanted to dismiss it all as the ramblings of an old man. But after what I'd seen in those woods, I couldn't afford to be skeptical. So, what do we do? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Gus met my gaze, his eyes sharp and clear. We hunted down and sent it back where it came from, but it ain't gonna be easy. That thing is smart, and it's angry, as if to punctuate his words. A long, mournful howl echoed through the night, causing both of us to stiffen. It was distant, but unmistakable, and definitely not a wolf or coyote. "It's Colin," Gus muttered, his face pale in the lamplight. "Colin, for others." A chill ran down my spine at his words. "Others, you mean there could be more of those things?" Gus nodded grimly. "If we don't stop it soon, it will. And then, well, let's just say we don't want to find out what happens then." As the howl faded into the night, replaced by an eerie silence, I knew that our time was running out. Whatever was out there in the darkness was growing stronger, more bold, and we were woefully unprepared to face it. "All right," I said, standing up and grabbing my jacket. "Let's go wake up, Jim. We've got work to do." As we left the office, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were about to step into something far bigger and more dangerous than we could possibly imagine. The forest, once a place of solace and familiarity, now loomed before us like a vast, hungry maw ready to swallow us whole. But we had no choice. We had to stop this thing, whatever the cost. Because if we didn't, I had a sickening feeling that the horrors we'd witnessed so far would pale in comparison to what was coming. The hunt was on, and this time we were the ones doing the hunting. Or so we thought. The next morning dawned gray and misty, as if the forest itself was trying to shroud our mission in secrecy. Jim, Gus, and I gathered at the ranger station before first light. Our faces grim with determination and barely concealed fear. "All right," I said, spreading out a map of the forest on the hood of my truck. "Gus, you said these creatures are drawn to certain areas. Can you point them out?" The old hunter nodded, his gnarled finger tracing over several locations on the map. "These here are the old ritual sites. If that thing's gonna try to open more doorways, it'll be at one of these spots." Jim leaned in, his brow furrowed. "So what's the plan? We can't exactly go to all these places at once." I took a deep breath. The weight of our task settled heavily on my shoulders. "We'll have to split up, that way we can cover more ground." "Split up?" Jim echoed, his voice rising. "Are you insane? Did you forget what that thing did to those hikers?" "We don't have a choice," I argued, though my own stomach churned at the idea. "If we don't stop this thing now, more people are gonna die." Gus nodded solemnly. He was right. We need to end this before it gets worse. With reluctance, we divided the map into sections, each of us taking a different area to search. Gus handed out small replicas of his totem, explaining that they might offer some protection against the creature. As we prepared to head out, I pulled Jim aside. "Listen, if you see anything at all, you radio it immediately. Don't try to be a hero, got it?" He nodded, his usual smirk nowhere to be seen. "Same goes for you, boss. Don't do anything stupid out there." With foul nods and acknowledgments, we set off into the misty forest, each heading in a different direction. The woods seemed to close in around me as I hiked. The fog muffled all sound and created an otherworldly atmosphere. Hours passed as I searched, my nerves fraying with each step. Every shadow seemed to move, every rustle of leaves sounded like approaching footsteps. But there was no sign of the creature. It was nearing dusk when I heard it. a low, guttural growl that seemed to come from everywhere at once. I froze, my hand going to the grip of my pistol. "Lane, you copy?" Jim's voice crackled over the radio, startling me. "I'm here," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. "You hear that?" "Yeah," he said, his tone tense. "I think it's—" His words were cut off by a blood-curdling scream that echoed through the forest. The blood ran cold as I recognized Jim's voice. "Jim," I shouted into the radio. "Jim, where are you?" There was no response, just the hiss of static. Without thinking, I took off running in the direction I thought the scream had come from, my heart pounding in my ears. The forest blowed around me as I ran, branches whipping at my face. I burst into a small clearing and skidded to a halt, horror freezing me in place. There, in the center of the clearing, stood the creature. It was even more terrifying in the fading daylight, its misshapen form casting long shadows across the ground. At its feet lay Jim, motionless and bloody. The creature's head swiveled towards me, its glowing eyes locking onto mine. In that moment I knew with certainty that I was looking at my own death. But then something unexpected happened. The creature spoke. "You cannot stop what is coming," it growled, its voice a horrifying mixture of human and animal sounds. "The doorways will open. My kind will return." I stood there paralyzed with fear and shock. This thing wasn't just some mindless beast, it was intelligent, purposeful, and that made it infinitely more dangerous. As if to prove my point, the creature suddenly lunged forward, moving with impossible speed. I barely had time to raise my gun before it was upon me, its massive form blocking out the sky. The last thing I saw was a flash of teeth and claws before darkness claimed me. I awoke to pain, searing, all-encompassing pain that made me wish for the oblivion of unconsciousness. Slowly, agonizingly, I opened my eyes. I was in a cave, the rough stone walls glistening with moisture. The air was thick with the stench of decay and something else, something alien and wrong. As my vision cleared, I saw Jim lying a few feet away. He was alive, but badly injured, his chest rising and falling in shallow, labored breaths. "Jim," I croaked, my voice barely audible. "Jim, can you hear me?" He stirred slightly, but didn't respond. I tried to move towards him, but my body screamed in protest. Looking down, I saw deep gashes across my chest and arms, the wounds caked with dried blood. A low growl from the shadows made me freeze. Slowly, the creature emerged into the dim light, filtering through cracks in the cave ceiling. "You are strong," it rumbled, its misshapen head tilting as it regarded me. "Most humans would be dead." I struggled to sit up, biting back a cry of pain. What are you?" The creature's mouth twisted into what might have been a smile, revealing rows of razor-sharp teeth. "We are the forgotten ones, the old ones, banished from this world by your ancestors, trapped between realities." It moved closer, its massive form looming over me. "But now we return. The stars align, the barriers weaken. Soon the doorways will open fully and my brethren will walk this earth once more." Terror clawed at my throat as the implications of its words sank in. This wasn't just about one monster in the woods, this was the vanguard of an invasion. "Why are you telling me this?" I managed to ask, my voice shaking. The creature's eyes glowed with an otherworldly light. "Because you will be the first to witness our return, your fear, your despair. It will feed us, make us stronger." As if on cue, a distant rumbling shook the cave. Dust and small rocks rained down from the ceiling. "It begins," the creature growled, turning its attention to the cave entrance. In that moment, survival instinct overrode my pain and fear. I lunged for Jim, grabbing him under the arms and dragging him towards a narrow crevice in the cave wall. The creature roared behind us, but it was too focused on whatever was happening outside to give chase. As we squeezed through the crevice, I caught a glimpse of the sky through the cave mouth. What I saw chilled me to my core. The stars were moving, realigning themselves into impossible configurations. The very fabric of reality seemed to be tearing apart. We emerged on the other side of the crevice into the forest. The ground was shaking, trees swaying dangerously. In the distance, I could see strange lights pulsing in the sky. "Come on, Jim," I grunted, half carrying, half dragging my partner through the chaos. "We've got to warn them. We've got to stop this." As we stumbled through the darkening forest, the world literally falling apart around us. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were already too late. The abyss had opened, and now it was gazing back at us with hungry, inhuman eyes. Dawn broke over a world changed. The forest, once familiar and comforting, now felt alien and hostile. Strange growths clung to the trees, pulsing with an otherworldly light. The air itself seemed charged with an unnatural energy that made my skin crawl. Jim and I had somehow made it back to the ranger station, though the journey was a blur of pain and terror. We found Gus there, his face ashen and drawn. "It's happening all over," he said without preamble, gesturing to a bank of radio equipment. "Reports coming in from everywhere. Strange creatures, reality itself seeming to warp and change." I nodded grimly, wincing as the movement pulled at my wounds. "We saw it. The stars, they're wrong. And there are more of those things coming through." Jim, who had finally regained consciousness, spoke up weakly from where he lay on a cot. "So what do we do? How do we stop this?" Gus' eyes hardened with determination. "There's one last ritual site, the most powerful one. If we conceal it, we might be able to close the other doorways too." "What?" I echoed, hysterical laugh bubbling up in my throat. "That's not exactly reassuring." The old hunter shrugged. "It's all we've got. Unless you want to sit here and wait for those things to overrun us." He had a point. With grim resolve, we gathered what supplies we could and set out into the twisted landscape that had once been our forest. The journey was a nightmare. The very ground seemed to shift beneath our feet, and more than once we found ourselves face to face with creatures that defied description. Only Gus totems and our own desperate determination kept us alive. As we neared the ritual site, a massive stone circle hidden deep in the woods, the air grew thick and heavy. Reality itself seemed to bend and warp around us, and there in the center of the circle stood the creature that had started it all. But it was changed now, grown even larger and more monstrous. Around it swirled a vortex of energy, a tear in the fabric of our world. "You're too late," it growled as we approached, its voice echoing with otherworldly power. "The doorway is open, my kind are coming through." Gus stepped forward, raising his totem high. "Not if we have anything to say about it." What followed was a battle unlike anything I could have imagined. Just chanted in a language I didn't recognize, his voice rising above the howling wind. Jim and I fought off wave after wave of nightmarish creatures that poured from the vortex. I lost track of time, lost in a haze of gunfire and terror. My world narrowed to the next threat, the next monster to put down. And then suddenly it was over. With a sound like reality itself tearing apart, the vortex collapsed inward. The creature let out a final agonized roar as it was pulled back through the closing doorway. In the sudden silence that followed, I became aware of the toll the battle had taken. Jim lay motionless on the ground, blood pooling beneath him. Gus was on his knees, the totem crumbling to dust in his hands. As for me, I could feel my own life ebbing away, my injuries finally catching up with me. But as darkness crept in at the edges of my vision, I felt a sense of grim satisfaction. We had done it. We had closed the doorway. The world was safe, at least for now. As consciousness slipped away, my last thought was of the forest. Our forest. And I hoped that someday it would recover from the horrors it had witnessed. That someday it would be a place of peace and beauty once more. But deep down, I knew the truth. A forest would never be the same again, and neither would I. They found us there in that stone circle, search and rescue, drawn by the strange lights and sounds. They couldn't explain what they saw, the scorched earth, the bizarre growths that even now were beginning to wither and die. I was the only survivor. Jim and Gus had given their lives to save our world, heroes whose sacrifices would never be truly understood. As for me, I recovered, at least physically, but the scars run deeper than the ones on my body. I see shadows where there should be none, hear whispers in the silence of the night. I no longer work as a ranger. How could I, knowing what lurks in the dark places of the world? Instead, I've taken up Gus' mantle. I travel, seeking out the hidden places, the forgotten rituals, making sure the doorways stay closed. Because I know the truth now. The monsters are real. And the only things standing between them and our world are people like me. People willing to stare into the abyss, knowing it will always stare back. So if you're ever in the woods and you feel a chill run down your spine, if you hear something moving in the shadows that sounds just a little too big, a little too wrong, run and don't look back. Because the forest keeps its secrets, and some of them are better left undiscovered. I've always been drawn to the wilderness. Growing up in Colorado, I spent every free moment exploring the Rocky Mountains, breathing in the crisp mountain air, and losing myself in the vast expanses of untamed nature. School never held my interest the way the outdoors did. While my classmates pored over textbooks, I was busy learning the language of the forest, the whisper of wind through pine needles, the soft crunch of leaves underfoot, and the distant cry of an eagle soaring overhead. At 18, fresh out of high school with no clear direction, I found myself drawn to the structure and promise of adventure offered by the military. The Army seemed like a natural fit for someone like me, someone who craved challenge and thrived in rugged environments. Little did I know that my love for the wilderness and my newfound military career would converge in a way I never could have imagined in the heart of Oklahoma's Wichita Mountains. Fort Sill, my first duty station, was a far cry from the towering peaks of my Colorado home. The landscape was different. Rolling prairies punctuated by ancient granite mountains, weathered by time into craggy outcrops and mysterious boulder fields. But there was a raw beauty to it, a sense of history etched into every rock and gnarled oak tree. In those early days at Fort Sill, I threw myself into training with the same enthusiasm I'd always had for outdoor pursuits. The physical demands were grueling, but I relished the challenge. Rooked marches across rugged terrain, land navigation exercises in dense thickets, and long nights spent under the stars. It all fed that primal part of me that longed for connection with the natural world. But there was something else about Fort Sill that set it apart from other military installations I'd heard about. Whispers and legends circulated among the soldiers, passed down from one cycle of recruits to the next. Stories of strange sightings in the surrounding wilderness, unexplained noises echoing across the artillery ranges at night, and shadows that seemed to move of their own accord in the peripheral vision of exhausted sentries. Most older soldiers laughed these tales off as the overactive imaginations of sleep-deprived privates. Ghost stories to keep new guys on their toes, they'd say with a knowing smirk. But there was always an undercurrent of unease, the sense that even the most hardened veterans weren't entirely comfortable with the idea of being alone in certain parts of the post after dark. I listened to these stories with a mixture of skepticism and fascination. Growing up in Colorado, I'd heard my fair share of Native American folklore tales of skinwalkers and wind spirits that haunted the mountains. I'd always viewed them as interesting cultural artifacts, bits of oral tradition passed down through generations. But I'd never given them much credence as literal truth. Still, on my first few night watches at Fort Sill, I couldn't help but feel a prickle of unease as I gazed out into the darkness beyond the floodlights. The Wichita Mountains loomed in the distance, their silhouettes barely visible against the star-studded Oklahoma sky. In those quiet hours, with only the soft hum of distant generators and the occasional call of a coyote breaking the silence, it was easy to let one's mind wander to unsettling places. I told myself it was just natural apprehension from being in an unfamiliar place, amplified by the heightened alertness that came with military training. But deep down, part of me wondered if there might be more to the stories than mere campfire tales. Little did I know that I was about to embark on an experience that would challenge everything I thought I knew about the natural world and my place in it. The day of our week-long field training exercise dawned crisp and clear, with October air carrying just a hint of winter to come. As our convoy of vehicles rumbled out of Fort Sill and into the sprawling wilderness of the Wichita Mountains Wildlife Refuge, I felt a familiar surge of excitement. This was what I had signed up for, the chance to test my skills in a real-world environment, push my limits, and prove my worth as a soldier. The unit, an artillery battery, had been tasked with setting up a remote firing position deep within the refuge. It was a complex operation involving the coordination of multiple teams to transport and position our massive howitzers, establish secure communications, and create a defensible perimeter. As a junior specialist, my role was primarily to follow orders and provide support wherever needed. The first few hours were a flurry of activity. The air filled with the rumble of engines, the metallic clang of equipment being unloaded, and the constant chatter of radio communications. Dust kicked up by our vehicles hung in the air, creating a hazy atmosphere that seemed to blur the boundaries between the familiar world of military precision and the wild, untamed landscape that surrounded us. As the sun began to dip towards the horizon, casting long shadows across our makeshift camp, a sense of accomplishment settled over the unit. Our howitzers stood ready, their long barrels pointed towards distant, unseen targets. Camouflage netting had been expertly draped over vehicles and sensitive equipment, breaking up their outlines and helping them blend into the rugged terrain. The command post buzzed with activity as officers pored over maps and discussed the next day's training scenarios. With the bulk of the setup complete, our platoon sergeant began assigning night watch rotations. When he called my name and paired me with Corporal Jenkins for the midnight to 4 o'clock shift, I felt a mix of anticipation and slight apprehension. Night watches were always a test of mental fortitude, fighting off fatigue, staying alert in the face of mind-numbing boredom, and battling the tricks that darkness can play on an overstimulated imagination. As twilight faded into true night, the mood in the camp shifted. Conversations became more hushed, laughter less frequent. The daytime bustle gave way to a tense quietude, broken only by the soft crackle of radio checks and the occasional cough or shuffle of boots on rocky ground. In the distance, the silhouettes of the Wichita Mountains loomed like sleeping giants, their presence somehow more palpable in the darkness. I busied myself with final preparations for the long night ahead, checking the charge on my radio, adjusting the red lens on my headlamp, and triple-checking that my M4 carbine was clean and ready for use if needed. As I worked, I couldn't shake a growing sense of unease. It wasn't anything I could put my finger on, just a vague feeling that something wasn't quite right. Maybe it was the unfamiliar terrain, so different from the mountain forests I'd grown up in. Or perhaps it was the weight of all those stories I'd heard back on Post, tales of strange encounters and inexplicable phenomena here in the wilderness. Whatever the cause, I found myself hyper-aware of every sound, every shadow. As fall darkness settled over our position, as I zipped up my jacket against the growing chill, Corporal Jenkins approached. His withered face was illuminated by the ember of his ever-present cigarette. "Ready for a wild night, specialist?" he asked, his gravelly voice laced with sarcasm. I nodded, trying to project more confidence than I felt. "Yes, Corporal," all set. He studied me for a moment, then shook his head slightly. "First time out here, isn't it? Word of advice, keep your wits about you. This place, it's got a way of playing tricks on you, especially at night." Stick to the established patrol routes. Maintain radio contact. And for God's sake, don't go wandering off into those woods unless you absolutely have to. Understood? Yes, Corporal, I replied, a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature running down my spine. As Jenkins moved off to brief the other members of our watch team, I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the long hours ahead. The Wichita Mountains stretched out before me, a vast expanse of darkness broken only by the faint glimmer of starlight on granite outcrops. Somewhere in that darkness, I knew, lay challenges I couldn't yet imagine. Tests of not just my training and physical endurance, but of my very perception of reality. With one last check of my gear, I stepped forward to assume my post. The first tentative steps into a night that would change everything. The first hour of our watch passed uneventfully. Corporal Jenkins and I patrolled the perimeter of our position, our boots crunching softly on the mix of gravel and scrub grass that covered the ground. The night was clear, stars blazing with an intensity I'd rarely seen even in the mountains of Colorado. The Milky Way stretched across the sky like a river of light, casting just enough illumination to silhouette the jagged peaks around us. Despite the beauty of the night, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every rustle in the underbrush, every shadow that seemed to move in the corner of my eye, sent a jolt of adrenaline through my system. I tried to rationalize it. We were in a wildlife refuge after all. The sounds were probably just nocturnal animals going about their business, unperturbed by our military presence at 1 o'clock. Jenkins decided to split up to cover more ground. You take the eastern perimeter, he said, gesturing toward a line of scrub oaks that marked the edge of our position. He'll cover the west radio check every 15 minutes. And remember what I said, stick to the patrol route. I nodded, squaring my shoulders and gripping my M4 a little tighter as I set off toward my assigned sector. The eastern perimeter skirted the edge of a dense thicket. The trees cast deep shadows that seemed to writhe and twist in my peripheral vision. I forced myself to focus on the task at hand, scanning the area methodically, just as I'd been trained. As I walked, I found myself whistling softly, an old habit from my hiking days, a way to break the oppressive silence and announce my presence to any wildlife that might be startled by a human's sudden appearance. The tune that came to my lips was Colonel Bogey Lodge, its jaunty melody incongruous with the tense atmosphere. I had just reached the furthest point of my patrol route when I heard it, a sound that stopped me dead in my tracks. A cough, not the bark of a coyote or the rustle of wind through leaves, but a distinctly human cough coming from the thicket to my right. My heart began to race. We weren't supposed to have any other units in this area. Could it be an infiltrator, someone trying to test our perimeter security, or worse, had someone from our unit wandered off and gotten lost? I called out, "Corporal Jenkins," my voice sounding thin and uncertain in the vast night. "Is that you?" There was no response, just the soft whisper of wind through the trees and the pounding of blood in my ears. I swept my rifle towards the source of the sound, flicking on my weapon light to illuminate the dense undergrowth. The beam cut through the darkness, casting stark shadows that seemed to dance and leap with a life of their own. And then I saw it. At first I thought it was just a trick of the light, a random pattern of shadows and foliage that my stressed mind was interpreting as a human form. But as I focused, the shape became clearer and more defined. There was a figure standing perhaps 20 feet away, partially obscured by a gnarled oak tree. The sight hit me like a physical blow. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to radio for help, to do something. But I stood frozen, my training warring with primal fear as I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. The figure was dressed in what looked like a military uniform, but one that was decades out of date, ragged and worn, hanging loosely on a frame that seemed simultaneously too thin and too tall to be natural. But it was the face that truly chilled me to my core. It was as if someone had taken features from a human and a deer and mashed them together in a nightmarish collage. The eyes were too large, too widely spaced, glowing with an unnatural reddish-brown light in the beam of my flashlight. The nose was elongated, almost snout-like, above a mouth that seemed to be fixed in a grimace of pain or hunger. As I stood there, paralyzed with shock and disbelief, the creature's gaze locked onto mine. There was intelligence in those eyes, a cold, calculating awareness that sent shivers down my spine. This was no animal, no trick of light and shadow. This was something else entirely. My eyes darted to the tattered name tape on its uniform, barely legible in the harsh light of my rifle-mounted flashlight. Thompson. The name burned itself into my brain, a bizarre detail that my mind latched onto in the midst of this surreal encounter. Finding my voice at last, I managed to stutter out a question. Who are you? The response came not in words, but in a cacophony of sounds. Animal cries, human voices, all layered together in a discordant echo that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. And within that maelstrom of noise, I heard my own question repeated back to me, distorted and mocking. I began to back away slowly, my rifle still trained on the figure. "The corporal is at post," I said, the words tumbling out almost of their own accord as I gestured vaguely to my left, toward where I knew the main part of our camp lay. For a moment, nothing happened. The creature, which my mind insisted on calling it Thompson, remained motionless, those unnatural eyes still fixed on me. Then, without warning, it let out a scream that seemed to pierce through my very being. It was a sound of rage, of hunger, of otherworldly malevolence that defied description. In that instant, several things happened at once. The red light on my headlamp, which I had been using for navigation, suddenly flared to an impossible brightness. The air around me seemed to thicken, making it hard to breathe, and my legs, finally breaking free from their paralysis, began moving of their own accord, carrying me backward away from the nightmare before me. I don't know how long I retreated like that, walking backward with my rifle still aimed at the spot where I'd seen the creature. It felt like hours, though it was probably only a matter of minutes. Eventually, the glare of my headlamp began to fade, and with it, my lost visual connection to the thing called Thompson. As soon as the red glow diminished enough for me to see properly, I turned and ran. I ran with a desperation I'd never known before, heedless of the branches that whipped at my face and the uneven ground that threatened to trip me with every step. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs felt like lead, driven by a primal fear that overrode all reason and training. I burst out of the train line and into the clearing where we parked our vehicles, nearly colliding with Corporal Jenkins, who was leaning against the hood of a Humvee, cigarette in hand. He started at my sudden appearance, his hand instinctively moving towards his sidearm before he recognized me. "What the hell, specialist?" He barked, his gruff exterior not quite masking the concern in his voice. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Gasping for breath, I set my M4 on the hood of the Humvee, my hands shaking so badly I was afraid I might drop it. As the adrenaline began to ebb, the full weight of what I'd experienced crashed over me. I looked at Jenkins, saw the mixture of annoyance and worry on his weathered face, and knew I had to try to explain. So I told him everything, the cough in the woods, the bizarre figure, the name on the uniform, the inhuman scream. As I spoke, I watched Jenkins' expression change from skepticism to something harder to read. He didn't interrupt, just listened silently, his eyes constantly scanning the tree line behind me. When I finished, there was a long moment of silence, broken only by the soft hiss of Jenkins' cigarette as he took a long, contemplative drag. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and tight. "Specialist," Jenkins said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Go wake the next shift and don't go back into those woods." There was something in his tone that sent a fresh wave of chills down my spine. It wasn't just the gruff command of a superior to a subordinate, there was an undercurrent of what? Fear. Understanding. I couldn't quite place it, but it was clear that my story had affected him more deeply than he was letting on. As I moved to follow his order, Jenkins sprang into action. With a speed and precision that spoke of years of experience, he maneuvered the Humvee, positioning it between us and the tray line where I had encountered whatever it was I had seen. The heavy vehicle seemed like a flimsy barrier against the horrors that lurked in the darkness, but its presence was nonetheless reassuring. I made my way through our makeshift camp, rousing the next watch shift. My fellow soldiers grumbled and cursed as they emerged from their sleeping bags, but I barely registered their complaints. My mind was still reeling, trying to make sense of what had happened. As I moved from one soldier to the next, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat. Every rustle of wind through the scrub oaks sounded like that unearthly cough. By the time I had finished waking everyone, Jenkins had taken up position in the Humvee's turret, his watchful gaze fixed on the woods. As I approached, he looked down at me, his face half illuminated by the soft glow of his cigarette. For a moment our eyes met, and I saw in his expression a mix of emotions I couldn't quite decipher. Concern, fear, and something that looked almost like resignation. "Get some rest, specialist," he said gruffly. "We've got a long day ahead of us tomorrow." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. As I crawled into my sleeping bag, I cast one last glance at the tray line. The Wichita Mountains loomed beyond, their jagged silhouettes a stark reminder of how small and vulnerable we were out here. Somewhere in those shadows I knew something waited. Something would defy explanation, something that shouldn't exist. Sleep, when it finally came, was fitful and plagued by nightmares. In my dreams, I wandered endless forests, pursued by a figure that was always just out of sight. The name Thompson echoed through my subconscious, a mocking refrain that seemed to come from the very trees themselves. I woke several times, drenched in sweat. Despite the cool night air, the image of those inhuman eyes burning in my mind. The first light of dawn found me already awake, staring at the canvas roof of my tent. As the camp began to stir around me, I lay there trying to make sense of the previous night's events. In the harsh light of day, it all seemed so implausible. Had I really seen what I thought I'd seen, or had the stress of the field exercise combined with the eerie atmosphere of the Wichita Mountains played some elaborate trick on my mind? I emerged from my tent to find the camp buzzing with its usual morning activity. Soldiers moved about, breaking down equipment, preparing for the day's training scenarios. Everything seemed so normal, so routine. It was hard to reconcile this mundane scene with the terror I had experienced just hours before. As I made my way to the chow line, I caught sight of Corporal Jenkins. He was engaged in conversation with our platoon sergeant, his face set in its usual stern expression. For a moment I considered approaching him, seeking some kind of confirmation or explanation for what had happened. That something in his posture, the way his eyes darted occasionally to the tree line, made me hesitate. Throughout the morning briefing, I found it hard to focus. The lieutenant's words about artillery placements and simulated enemy positions washed over me, barely registering. My mind kept drifting back to the woods, to that bizarre encounter. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were missing something crucial, that there was a danger here that went beyond the scope of our training exercise. As we moved out to our designated positions, I found myself scanning the terrain obsessively. Every boulder seemed to hide a potential threat, every cluster of trees a possible hiding place for... I wasn't even sure what I was looking for anymore. All I knew was that the Wichita Mountains no longer felt like just another training ground. They had become something alien and threatening, a landscape charged with menace. The day's exercises passed in a blur of artillery fire and tactical maneuvers. I went through the motions, performing my duties with a mechanical efficiency that belied the turmoil in my mind. My fellow soldiers noticed my distraction, shooting me concerned glances and whispered questions that I deflected with mumbled excuses about not sleeping well. It was during the lull in the afternoon's activities that Corporal Jenkins approached me. He looked tired, the lines on his face seeming deeper than usual. Without preamble, he pulled me aside out of earshot of the others. "About last night," he began, his voice low and gravelly. "I need you to understand something. What happens out here in these mountains, it stays here. You got that?" I nodded, a mix of relief and apprehension washing over me. So I hadn't imagined it. Something had happened. Something real enough that Jenkins felt the need to address it. "What was it?" I asked, unable to keep the desperation out of my voice. "What did I see?" Jenkins was quiet for a long moment, his eyes scanning the horizon as if searching for threats. When he spoke again, his words were careful, measured. "There are things in this world that don't fit neatly into the boxes we're taught about in basic training," he said. "Things that can't be explained by standard military doctrine. These mountains, they're old, older than any of us can really comprehend. And sometimes, in places like this, the line between what's real and what's not, it gets blurry." He paused, taking a long drag on his ever-present cigarette before continuing. "I can't tell you what you saw last night. Hell, I'm not sure I want to know. But I can tell you this. You're not the first to have an experience like that out here, and you probably won't be the last." With that cryptic statement, Jenkins clapped me on the shoulder and walked away, leaving me with more questions than answers. As I watched him go, I felt a strange mix of emotions, fear, confusion, but also a sort of grim determination. Whatever was out there, whatever Thompson was, I knew that I couldn't simply ignore it or wish it away. As the sun began to dip towards the horizon, painting the Wichita Mountains in shades of gold and crimson, I made a silent vow to myself. I would uncover the truth behind what I had seen, no matter where that search might lead me. Little did I know that this decision would set me on a path that would challenge everything I thought I knew about the world and my place in it. The next few days of our field exercise passed in a haze of heightened alertness and barely contained anxiety. Every night, watch became an ordeal, my senses straining for any sign of the otherworldly presence I had encountered. But aside from the usual sounds of the wilderness, the call of coyotes, the rustle of wind through the scrub oaks, the Wichita Mountains remained stubbornly, almost mockingly normal. It was during this time that I began to dig deeper into the history of Fort Sill and the surrounding area. In stolen moments between training exercises, I poured over whatever information I could find on my smartphone, hungrily consuming articles about the region's past. What I discovered only deepened the mystery. The Wichita Mountains, I learned, had been a sacred place for various Native American tribes long before the arrival of European settlers. The Apache, Comanche, and Kiowa had all called this rugged landscape home at various points in history. Legends and stories abounded of vision quests undertaken in these mountains, spiritual encounters with beings that defied easy categorization. But it was a more recent history that truly caught my attention. Fort Sill itself had been established in 1869, and in the century and a half since then it had seen its share of tragedy and conflict. Soldiers had died here, both in training accidents and in various conflicts that the fort had played a role in over the years. One story in particular stood out to me. In the late 1960s, at the height of the Vietnam War, there had been reports of a soldier who had gone missing during a training exercise in the wildlife refuge. The details were frustratingly vague. Official records seemed to have been either lost or deliberately obscured. But the fragments I could piece together painted a disturbing picture. The soldier, whose name was redacted in the few documents I could find, had apparently wandered off from his unit during a night maneuver. Search parties had combed the area for days, but no trace of him was ever found. What stuck with me, though, was a detail mentioned in a local newspaper article from the time several of the searchers had reported strange sightings and unexplained phenomena during the hunt for the missing man. As I read these accounts, a chill ran down my spine. The descriptions, fleeting glimpses of a figure that seemed to melt into the shadows, eerie sounds that couldn't be attributed to any known animal, a pervasive sense of being watched by something ancient and malevolent, all resonated with my own experience. Could it be possible? Had I encountered something connected to this long-ago tragedy? The rational part of my mind rebelled against the idea, insisting that there had to be a logical explanation. But another part, a part that had been awakened by that night in the woods, whispered that perhaps the truth was stranger and more terrifying than anything I had been prepared to believe. My obsession with uncovering the truth began to affect my performance. During day exercises, I found myself distracted, my mind constantly turning over the pieces of this bizarre puzzle. My squad mates noticed, shooting me concerned glances and occasionally covering for my lapses in attention. I was grateful for their support, even if I couldn't bring myself to explain what was really troubling me. It was Corporal Jenkins who finally confronted me about it. He caught me one evening as I was hunched over my phone, frantically scrolling through yet another article about local legends. "You need to let it go," he said, his voice a mixture of concern and frustration. "Whatever you think you saw out there, whatever you think you're gonna find, it's not worth obsessing over. Focus on the mission at hand." I looked up at him, seeing the worry etched in the lines of his weathered face. For a moment I was tempted to confide in him, to share the connections I thought I had uncovered. But something held me back, a combination of fear of being dismissed as crazy and a growing sense that this was something I needed to figure out on my own. "I'm fine, Corporal," I lied, forcing a smile that felt brittle even to me. "Just having trouble sleeping out here, that's all." Jenkins held my gaze for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Finally he nodded, though it was clear he didn't believe me. "Get some rest," he said gruffly. "We've got night fire exercises tomorrow. I need you sharp." As he walked away, I felt a pang of guilt for the deception, but it was overshadowed by a growing determination. I was onto something, I was sure of it. The history of this place, the legends, my own experience, they were all connected somehow. And I was going to figure out how, no matter what it took. Little did I know that my chance to uncover the truth would come sooner than I expected, and in a way that would test not just my courage, but my very grip on reality. The night of the live fire exercise dawned clear and cold, the stars blazing overhead with an intensity that seemed almost unnatural. As our unit moved into position, the massive hulks of the howitzers looming against the star-studded sky, I felt a sense of anticipation mixed with dread. Something about the night felt charged, as if the very air was alive with potential energy. Our objective was straightforward. The series of simulated enemy positions scattered throughout a nearby valley. We were to provide artillery support for a hypothetical infantry assault, demonstrating our ability to deliver accurate fire under nighttime conditions. It was the kind of exercise we had trained for countless times, but something about doing it here, the shadow of the Wichita Mountains, felt different. As we went through our pre-fire checks, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every time I glanced towards the tree line, I half expected to see a pair of glowing eyes staring back at me. The name Thompson echoed in my mind, a constant unsettling refrain. The first volleys lit up the night sky, the flash and thunder of the howitzers momentarily drowning out all other sensations. As we worked to reload and adjust our fire, I fell into the familiar rhythm of the task, my hands moving almost of their own accord. For a while, the sheer intensity of the exercise pushed my darker thoughts to the background. It was during a lull in the firing as we waited for new coordinates from our forward observers that it happened. The sound cut through the night, a cough eerily similar to the one I had heard on that fateful night watch. My head snapped up, eyes scanning the darkness beyond our position. For a moment I saw nothing. Then, at the edge of our floodlit area, a shadow moved. It was just for an instant, a flicker of movement that could have been a trick of the light. But I knew with a certainty that chilled me to my core that it was him, Thompson. Without thinking, I took a step towards the tree line, my hand instinctively reaching for my sidearm. A shout from Corporal Jenkins snapped me back to reality. Fire mission, gun 3, and just fire. I turned back to my post, my heart racing. As I helped load the next round, my mind was in turmoil. Had I really seen something? Or was my overstressed mind playing tricks on me? And if it was real, what did it mean? Why here? Why now? The rest of the exercise passed in a blur of fire and smoke. I performed my duties mechanically, my body going through the motions while my mind grappled with what I had seen. As the last echoes of our final volley faded into the night, I knew that I couldn't ignore this anymore. I had to find answers. As we began securing our equipment, I made a decision. Once post-exercise duties were complete, and the rest of the unit had bedded down for the night, I would go back into those woods, alone if necessary. Whatever was out there, whatever Thompson was, I had to confront it. The hours crawled by with agonizing slowness. I went through the motions of cleaning my station, hoping to stow gear, all the while acutely aware of the looming presence of the Wichita Mountains. Finally, as the camp settled into the quiet of early morning hours, I saw my chance. Slipping away from my tent, I made my way towards the trail line. The night was quiet now, the earlier cacophony of artillery fire replaced by the soft whisper of wind through the leaves and the distant call of a coyote. As I reached the edge of the woods, I paused, my hand resting on the grip of my sidearm. This was it. The moment of truth. Whatever lay beyond those trees, I was about to face it. With a deep breath, I stepped forward, leaving the relative safety of the camp behind and plunging into the unknown darkness of the Wichita Mountains. The woods seemed to close in around me as I moved deeper into their depths. The beam of my flashlight carved a narrow path through the darkness, illuminating gnarled tree trunks and dense underbrush. Every shadow seemed to move. Every rustle of leaves sent a jolt of adrenaline through my system. But I pressed on, driven by a need for answers that overrode my fear. I'm not sure how long I walked. Time seemed to lose all meaning in that primeval landscape. The familiar sounds of the camp faded away, replaced by the eerie silence of the deep woods. Occasionally, I would hear something, a twig snapping, a rustling in the undergrowth. That would make me freeze, my hand tightening on my weapon. But each time the sound would fade, leaving me alone with my racing thoughts. It was when I reached a small clearing that I saw it. A figure standing motionless at the far edge of the open space. Even in the dim light, I could make out the tattered uniform, the unnatural stance that was somehow both rigid and fluid at the same time. And those eyes, those terrible glowing eyes that seemed to bore into my very soul. Thompson, I whispered, the name escaping my lips almost involuntarily. The figure didn't move, didn't react in any way to my presence. It just stood there, watching me with that unblinking gaze. Gathering my courage, I took a step forward. "Who are you?" I called out, my voice sounding thin and weak in the oppressive silence of the clearing. "What do you want?" For a long moment there was no response. And slowly, the figure began to move. Its movements were jerky, unnatural, as if it were a marionette being controlled by an unskilled puppeteer. As it stepped into the full beam of my flashlight, I felt my breath catch in my throat. Up close, the creature was even more terrifying than I remembered. Its face was a nightmarish blend of human and animal features, skin stretched tight over protruding bones. The uniform hung in tatters from its emaciated frame. A name tape, barely legible, Thompson. The name repeated like a mantra, growing louder with each iteration. Thompson, Thompson, Thompson. I stood rooted to the spot, my mind reeling as I tried to process what I was seeing, what I was hearing. Suddenly the creature's head snapped up, its glowing eyes locking onto mine. In that moment, I felt a rush of something. Images. Sensations, emotions that weren't my own flooded my consciousness. I saw flashes of a young soldier lost and afraid in these very woods. I felt the terror of being alone in the darkness, the gradual realization that he couldn't find his way back. I experienced the slow descent into madness as days turned into weeks, as hunger and thirst warred with a growing sense that something in these mountains wanted him to stay. And then, at the end, a choice. A terrible, impossible choice offered by something ancient and powerful that dwelled in the depths of the Wichita Mountain. A chance at a kind of survival, but at a cost that would strip away his humanity. As quickly as it had come, the flood of impressions receded. I found myself on my knees, gasping for breath, my whole body shaking. When I looked up, the creature, Thompson, was gone. In its place stood Corporal Jenkins, his face a mask of concern and resignation. "You saw it, didn't you?" he asked quietly, helping me to my feet. "You saw what happened to Thompson?" I nodded, unable to form words. Jenkins sighed heavily, his eyes scanning the tree line as if expecting the creature to reappear at any moment. "It's been out here for decades," he explained. "Ever since that training exercise went wrong in '68. Most of the time it stays hidden, but sometimes it reaches out, tries to make contact. I think it's looking for redemption, or maybe just an end to its suffering. But what is it?" I managed to ask, my voice hoarse. Jenkins shook his head. No, not really. Something that doesn't belong in our world, something that's been twisted by forces we can't understand. All I know is that it's our burden now. Those of us who've seen it, who know the truth. We keep the secret, we keep others safe, and we hope that someday we'll find a way to put Thompson to rest. Now as we made our way back to camp, the first light of dawn was starting to break over the Wichita Mountains. The world seemed different now, charged with a knowledge that I could never unlearn. I knew that my life had been irrevocably changed by what I had experienced. In the days and years that followed, I would often think back to that night in the woods. The memory of Thompson, the man he was, the creature he became, haunted my dreams. But it also drove me, pushing me to seek out the hidden truths of the world, to explore the shadowy places where reality blurs into something else. The Wichita Mountains had revealed a secret to me, a glimpse into a world beyond the one I thought I knew. It was a burden, yes, but also a gift. For in that moment of terror and revelation, I had discovered a depth to existence that I had never imagined possible. As I write this account years later, I still feel the weight of that knowledge. The world is stranger and more wondrous than most people realize, and somewhere out there in the ancient hills of Oklahoma, something waits. Something that was once a man named Thompson, something that serves as a reminder of the mysteries that still lurk in the dark corners of our world, waiting to be discovered by those brave or foolish enough to look. The warm breeze of early March caressed my face as I stepped out of my car, breathing in the crisp air that hinted of the approaching spring. It was an unusually pleasant Saturday afternoon, the kind that beckons you outdoors after months of winter hibernation. I couldn't help but smile as I saw my friends pull up in their vehicles, their faces mirroring my excitement for the adventure that lay ahead. There were 5 of us in total, myself, 2 sisters they'll call Kara and Lena, and our friends Tom and Ryan. We were all in our early 20s, that age where the world still feels full of mystery and potential. Our shared love for the outdoors and fascination with the unknown had brought us together for countless adventures, but little did we know that this particular outing would leave an indelible mark on our psyches. As we gathered our gear from our cars, I couldn't help but notice how the sun seemed to dance through the leaves of the towering trees that surrounded the parking lot of the nature preserve. The Illinois landscape stretched out before us, a tapestry of green and brown hues that promised both beauty and secrets. "Everyone ready?" I called out, shouldering my backpack filled with our ghost hunting equipment. It was a hodgepodge of devices we collected over the years. EMF meters, digital voice recorders, and even an infrared camera. While we approached our hobby with a healthy dose of skepticism, there was always that thrill of possibility that kept us coming back for more. Kara, the older of the two sisters, adjusted her thick glasses and gripped her white cane tightly. Her visual impairment never dampened her adventurous spirit, and I admired her courage. "Ready as they'll ever be," she replied with a grin. "Just don't let me fall into any creepy sinkholes, okay?" Our sister Lena laughed, linking arms with her. "Don't worry, I've got you. Though I can't promise I won't push Tom in if he keeps making those terrible puns." Tom feigned defense, clutching his chest dramatically. "My puns are a national treasure, I'll have you know." Roy, in the quietest of our group, simply nodded and fell into step beside me as we approached the trailhead. The wooden sign marking the entrance to the preserve seemed to loom over us, the carved letters spelling out a warning that in hindsight we should have heeded more carefully. "Caution, trails close at sunset. No overnight camping." As we passed the sign, a shiver ran down my spine, despite the warmth of the day. I brushed it off as excitement, but looking back, I wonder if it wasn't some primal instinct trying to warn me of the horrors that awaited us in those seemingly innocent woods. The trail stretched before us, a winding path that disappeared into the dense foliage. The earth was still soft and slightly muddy from recent rains, releasing a rich earthy scent with each step we took. Birds chirped overhead, their melodies a soothing backdrop to our excited chatter. "So, what's the plan?" Ryan asked, his eyes scanning the try line as if expecting something to jump out at any moment. I pulled out a map of the preserve I printed earlier. "I thought we'd take the longer trail today. It loops around the entire preserve and should give us plenty of time to do some investigating before sunset." Lena peered over my shoulder at the map. "Looks like it passes by some of the older parts of the forest. Maybe we'll pick up some residual energy from the early settlers." Tom snorted. "Or maybe, well, just pick up some ticks. Did everyone remember their bug spray?" As we set off down the trail, the canopy above us grew thicker, dappling the sunlight and creating an almost ethereal atmosphere. The preservation efforts in this area had left much of the forest untouched for decades, and it showed in the gnarled roots that crisscrossed our path and the moss-covered rocks that seemed to whisper of ages past. I found myself falling into step beside Kara, offering my arm to help guide her over the uneven terrain. Her cane tapped rhythmically against the ground, a sound that would become eerily absent later in our journey. "Tell me what you see," Kara requested, her unseeing eyes staring straight ahead. I took a moment to really observe our surroundings, wanting to paint a vivid picture for her. "The trees here are ancient," I began, my voice low in reverence. "The trunks are wider than any of us could hope to wrap our arms around, and they stretch so high it's hard to see where they end. The sunlight filtering through the leaves creates these beautiful patterns on the forest floor like nature's own stained glass." Kara smiled, face tilted upward as if she could feel the very patterns I described and the smells she prompted. I inhaled deeply, closing my eyes to focus on the scents around us. It's a mix of damp earth, decaying leaves, and something sweeter, maybe wildflowers starting to bloom. There's also a hint of pine and that unique scent that only comes from really old trees. As we continued our hike, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Every rustle of leaves, every snapping twig seemed to carry more weight than it should. I chalked it up to the heightened awareness that came with our ghost hunting mindset. But in retrospect, I wonder if it wasn't something more sinister already taking notice of our presence. The first hour of our hike passed uneventfully. We stopped occasionally to take readings with our equipment or simply admired the beauty of the preserve. Tom's excitement was palpable as he regaled us with local legends and historical tidbits about the area. "Did you know that this land was considered sacred by some of the indigenous tribes?" he asked, his voice hushed as if sharing a great secret. "They believed it was a thin place where the veil between worlds was at its weakest." Ryan raised an eyebrow. "Thin place? You mean like where ghosts can cross over more easily? Tom nodded enthusiastically. Exactly. And not just ghosts, some cultures believe all sorts of entities can slip through in places like this. I felt Kara's grip on my arm tighten slightly. Let's hope we don't run into anything too unfriendly, she said, her tone light but with an undercurrent of unease. As the afternoon wore on, the forest around us seemed to grow denser and the air heavier. The cheerful birdsong that had accompanied the start of our journey gradually faded, replaced by an unsettling silence broken only by our footsteps and the occasional rustle of unseen creatures in the underbrush. It was Lena who first noticed the change in atmosphere. Is it just me, or does something feel off? She asked, her eyes darting nervously from tree to tree. I paused, taking stock of our surroundings. The shadows had lengthened, stretching like grasping fingers across the forest floor. The cool breeze had picked up, carrying with it a scent I couldn't quite place, something acrid and unnatural. It's probably just getting close to sunset, I reasoned, trying to keep my voice steady despite the growing unease in the pit of my stomach. We should think about heading back soon. But as I turned to consult our map, a sound pierced the silence, a sound that would haunt my nightmares for months to come. It was a whistle, long and eerily melodic, echoing through the trees from somewhere behind us. In that moment, as 5 pairs of eyes met in shared terror, I realized that our innocent hike had just taken a turn into something far more sinister. The real horror of our journey was about to begin. And none of us were prepared for what lay ahead in the gathering darkness of those cursed woods. As the last echoes of that haunting whistle faded into the encroaching twilight, an oppressive silence fell over our group. We stood frozen, our eyes darting between each other in the deepening shadows that seemed to pulse with malevolent intent. Kara's grip on my arm tightened to the point of pain. What was that? She whispered, her unseeing eyes wide with fear. I swallowed hard, my mouth suddenly dry. I'm not sure, I admitted, hating the tremor in my voice. It could have been a bird, or maybe... That was Nelbert, Tom interrupted, his usual jovial tone replaced by one of grim certainty. I've never heard anything like that in my life. The weight of his words settled over us like a shroud. As an avid outdoorsman and amateur ornithologist, Tom's knowledge of local wildlife was extensive. If he couldn't identify the sound, it meant we were dealing with something unknown and potentially dangerous. Ryan, ever the pragmatist, was the first to break out of our collective stupor. We need to get moving, he said, his voice low and urgent. It's getting dark fast, and I don't want to be out here if whatever made that sound decides to get curious about us. His words spurred us into action. I fumbled in my backpack for our flashlights, handing them out with shaking hands. As the beams of light cut through the gathering gloom, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were eliminating ourselves for some unseen predator. Okay, let's stay close together, I instructed, trying to project a calm I didn't feel. Kara, you keep holding my backpack. Lena, you and Tom take the lead. Ryan, bring up the rear. We're going to head back the way we came, as quickly and quietly as we can. As we set off down the trail, the forest seemed to close in around us. The trees, which had appeared so majestic and awe-inspiring earlier in the day, now loomed like silent sentinels, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers ready to snatch us from the path. The soft earth that had cushioned our steps on the way in now seemed to cling to our feet, as if trying to hold us back. Every few steps, one of us would stumble on a hidden root or slip on a patch of mud, the resulting curses echoing far too loudly in the unnatural quiet. We had been walking for perhaps 10 minutes, our pace much slower than I'd hoped due to the difficult terrain, and our reluctance to use the flashlights more than absolutely necessary when it happened again. The whistle. This time it was unmistakably closer, and there was a quality to it that sent chills racing down my spine. It was too precise, too controlled to be anything but intentional. Whatever was making that sound was intelligent, and it was stalking us. Run, I gasped, my voice barely above a whisper. We need to run now. We took off down the trail, all pretense of stealth abandoned in our desperation to put distance between ourselves and the source of that terrible sound. Kara stumbled almost immediately, her cane forgotten as she clung to my backpack. I could hear her labored breathing, knew that her heart condition made this mad dash potentially dangerous for her, but the alternative seemed far worse. The beam of my flashlight bounced wildly as we ran, creating a strobe-like effect that only added to the nightmarish quality of our flight. Shadows seemed to move independently of the trees casting them, and more than once I could have sworn I saw eyes gleaming in the darkness just beyond the reach of our lights. Behind us, the whistle came again, closer still. It had changed somehow, taken on a mocking quality, as if whatever was pursuing us was toying with its prey. The thought sent a fresh surge of adrenaline coursing through my veins. There, Lena's shout cut through the sound of our pounding footsteps and ragged breathing. I can see lights through the trees. Sure enough, the faint glow of civilization was visible through the thinning foliage. We had veered off the main trail in our panic, but by some miracle we were approaching the edge of the preserve where it bordered a residential area. Head for the road, I called out, remembering the layout from our map. If we can make it there, we'll be in the open. We altered our course, crashing through the underbrush with reckless abandon. Branches whipped at our faces and tore at our clothes, but we pressed on, driven by pure animalistic fear. The whistle came once more, so close now that I was certain if I turned I would see our pursuer. But I didn't dare look back, focusing instead on the steep embankment that separated us from salvation. We hit the slope at full speed, scrambling up the loose dirt and exposed roots. I heard a cry of pain behind me and turned to see Kara had lost her grip on my backpack. She was sliding back down the hill, her hands scrambling for purchase in the soft earth. Without thinking, I lunged for her, managing to grab her wrist. "I've got you," I yelled, straining to pull her up even as I felt myself being dragged down. For one terrifying moment, I was certain we were both going to tumble back into the waiting darkness. Then Lion was there, his strong hands gripping my shoulders, anchoring us both. With an Herculean effort, we managed to haul Kara up onto level ground. We lay there for a moment, gasping for air, our bodies trembling with exertion and fear. The road was just feet away now, the streetlights casting a warm, welcoming glow that seemed to push back the oppressive darkness of the forest. But as we staggered to our feet, preparing to make the final dash to safety, a sound froze us in place. It wasn't the whistle this time, but something far worse. Laughter, low, guttural, and utterly inhuman, bubbling up from the depths of the forest below us. It was a sound of cruel amusement, of a predator delighting in the terror of its quarry. And it was coming from multiple directions. Oh God, Tom whimpered. His earlier bravado had completely shattered. There's more than one. The realization hit us all like a physical blow. Whatever had been stalking us through the woods, it wasn't alone. And now we stood exposed on the crest of the hill, caught between the safety of the road and the nameless horrors that waited in the shadows. As the laughter grew louder, seeming to surround us completely, I knew we had only moments to make a decision that could mean the difference between life and death. The road beckoned, promising safety. But could we make it in time? Or would we be snatched away mere feet from salvation, dragged back into the hungry darkness that pulsed behind us? With hearts pounding and breaths coming in ragged gasps, we faced a choice that would haunt us long after this night was over. And as the laughter reached a fever pitch, I knew that whatever decision we made, our lives would never be the same again. The laughter crescendoed, a cacophony of inhuman mirth that seemed to vibrate through the very air around us. In that moment of paralyzing terror, time seemed to stretch and warp, each second feeling like an eternity as we stood frozen on the precipice between salvation and doom. It was Kara who broke the spell, her unseeing eyes wide with panic. "We have to move," she cried, her voice cracking with fear. "Please, we can't stay here." Her words jolted us into action. Without conscious thought, we surged forward as one, half running, half stumbling onto the asphalt of the road. The sudden transition from soft earth to hard pavement was jarring, and I nearly lost my footing. But the fear of what lurked behind us drove me onward, my legs pumping mechanically even as my lungs burned for air. The streetlights cast pools of sickly yellow illumination, creating islands of false safety in a sea of encroaching darkness. We ran from one circle of light to the next, as if they were stepping stones across a treacherous river. Behind us, the laughter had ceased, replaced by an eerie silence that was somehow even more terrifying. The absence of sound made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, evaluated like mice in a maze by some cruel, unseen observer. "Where are we going?" Tom gasped between labored breaths as we ran. I realized with a sinking feeling that in our panic we had fled in the opposite direction of where we had parked our cars. The unfamiliar suburban landscape stretched out before us, a maze of identical houses and manicured lawns that offered no clear path to safety. "We need to find help," I panted, my eyes darting frantically from house to house as we ran. "Maybe someone will let us use their phone, call for a ride." And as we passed house after house, a new kind of dread began to settle over us. Every home we passed was dark, silent, lifeless. No porch lights, no warm glow of television screens through windows, not even the faint flicker of a nightlight. It was as if the entire neighborhood had been abandoned. "This isn't right," Lena whispered, her voice tight with fear. "Where's everyone?" I didn't have an answer for her. The emptiness of the street was unnatural, oppressive, even the ambient sounds of a typical suburban night. Distant traffic, the hum of air conditioners, the occasional bark of a dog were conspicuously absent. The only sounds were our ragged breathing and the slap of our feet against the pavement. We slowed our pace, the initial burst of adrenaline fading and leaving us weak-kneed and trembling. Kara leaned heavily against me, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps that worried me. I knew her heart couldn't take much more of this strain. "We need to stop," I said, hating the decision even as I made it. "Just for a minute, to catch our breath and figure out where we are." We huddled together under a streetlight, its harsh glare doing little to dispel the shadows that seemed to press in around us. Ryan pulled out his phone, and for a moment hope flared in my chest. But it was quickly extinguished. "No signal," he muttered, his face ghostly in the blue light of the screen. "And the GPS isn't working either. It's like we're in some kind of dead zone." Tom let out a strangled laugh. "Dead zone. Great choice of words, buddy." I was about to reprimand him for the morbid joke when a sound cut through the unnatural silence. It was faint at first, barely perceptible, but it grew louder with each passing second. The whistle, that same haunting melody that had chased us from the woods. But this time it wasn't coming from behind us. It was ahead, somewhere in the maze of dark houses and empty streets. "No, Carmen," her grip on my arm painfully tight. No, it can't be." But it was. Whoever had been stalking us in the forest had somehow gotten ahead of us. The realization hit me like a physical blow, leaving me dizzy and nauseous. While we were being chased, we were being herded. "We need to go back," Lena said, her voice shaking. "Back to the preserve. To our cars." It was a terrible option, but it was the only one we had. With trembling hands, I helped Kara to her feet, and we turned as one to retrace our steps. But we had only gone a few paces when another whistle rose from the darkness. This one from the direction we had come. Then another from our left and another from the right. We were surrounded. "Oh God," Tom whimpered, spinning in place trying to keep all directions in view at once. "What do we do? What do we do?" I opened my mouth to respond, though I had no idea what I was going to say. But before I could utter a word, every streetlight on the block went out simultaneously, plunging us into total darkness. For a moment there was only the sound of our panicked breathing and the rapid drumming of my own heart. Then, from the impenetrable blackness around us came the laughter. Not from one source or even several, but from everywhere at once. It was as if the very night itself was mocking our fear. In that moment of pure primal terror, I felt something fundamental shift inside me. The world I thought I knew, with its rules and logic and comforting predictability, crumbled away. In its place was something older, darker, hungry. Whatever was out there in the dark, it wasn't just toying with us. It was savoring our fear, feeding on our panic. And as the laughter grew louder, pressing in on us from all sides, I realized with horrible clarity that our ordeal was far from over. In fact, it was only just beginning. As the laughter echoed around us, a primal instinct took over. Without a word, we huddled closer together, forming a tight circle with our backs to each other. I could feel the trembling of my friends' bodies pressed against mine. Hear the rapid, shallow breathing of pure terror. "We can stay here." Ryan's voice was barely above a whisper, but in the oppressive silence between bursts of laughter, it sounded as loud as a shout. We're sitting ducks. He was right, of course, but the thought of moving, of stepping out of our illusory circle of safety and into the waiting darkness was almost unbearable. Yet we had to do something. Anything. "Okay," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. We moved together, slow and quiet. "Kara, hold on to my backpack. Everyone else, link up. We're gonna head that way." I pointed towards what I hoped was the direction of a slight incline in the road. If we could get to higher ground, maybe we could get our bearings. We shuffled forward as one, a strange, multi-limbed organism born of desperation and fear. The darkness was so complete that I couldn't even see my hand in front of my face. Every step was a leap of faith. My foot tentatively reached out, expecting at any moment to step into empty air or feel something grab me from below. The laughter and fate had replaced once again by that eerie, expectant silence. But somehow that was worse. At least the laughter, as terrifying as it was, gave us some indication of where the threat was coming from. Now, in the silence, it felt like eyes were watching us from every direction, unseen predators waiting for the perfect moment to strike. We had been moving for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes when Tom's foot caught on something, sending him stumbling forward with a startled cry. His sudden movement yanked Lino off balance, and in a matter of seconds, our carefully coordinated unit collapsed into a tangle of flailing limbs and panicked shouts. I found myself on my hands and knees on what felt like grass. The smell of freshly cut lawn filled my nostrils. As I struggled to orient myself, my hand brushed against something hard and vertical, a fence post. "Everyone okay?" I called out, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the darkness. A chorus of groans and affirmatives answered me. As we picked ourselves up, I ran my hand along the fence, feeling my way along its length. It was a picket fence, the kind you might find around any suburban home, but its presence gave me an idea. "We need to find a house," I said. "Somewhere we can hold up, maybe find a working phone." "Are you crazy?" Lena hissed. "You want us to break into someone's home?" "You got a better idea," Ryan snapped back. The stress was clearly getting to all of us, fraying nerves and shortening tempers. Before the argument could escalate, Kara's quiet voice cut through the tension. "Do you smell that?" We fell silent, and I took a deep breath through my nose. At first I smelled nothing but grass and the lingering scent of our own fear sweat. But then, carried on a faint breeze, I caught it. Wood smoke. "Someone has a fire going," Tom said, a note of hope creeping into his voice for the first time in what felt like ages. "Or something's burning," Ryan muttered darkly. But none of us wanted to consider that possibility. We followed the scent, moving as quietly as we could while still keeping physical contact with each other. The ground began to slope upward more steeply, and I realized we must be climbing one of the hills that overlooked the town. As we crested the hill, a faint orange glow became visible in the distance. It flickered and danced in a way that was unmistakably firelight, and silhouetted against that glow was the dark shape of a house. Oh, thank God, Lena breathed. Maybe whoever lives there could help us. But as we drew closer, my initial relief began to fade, replaced by a growing sense of unease. The house was old, far older than any of the suburban homes we had passed earlier. Its architecture spoke of a different era, with a steep, pitched roof and gabled windows that seemed to stare down at us like accusing eyes. The source of the firelight became clear as we approached. A large bonfire burned in the overgrown front yard, casting wild, dancing shadows across the face of the house. But there was no sign of anyone tending the fire, no sounds of habitation from the house itself. We paused at the edge of the firelight, suddenly unsure. The house loomed before us, its windows dark and empty. The paint was peeling, the porch sagging. It looked like it had been abandoned for years, and yet someone had lit that fire. "I don't like this," Tom whispered, voicing what we were all thinking. "It feels like a trap." But we were exhausted, terrified, and out of options. Whatever lurked in the darkness behind us seemed far more threatening than this dilapidated old house. "We have to try," I said, squaring my shoulders. "Maybe there's a phone inside, or at least somewhere we can hide until morning." As we stepped into the circle of firelight, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were crossing a threshold, not just physically, but metaphysically. One are entering another world, one where the rules we knew no longer applied. The creak of the porch steps under our feet seemed impossibly loud. At the front door, I raised my hand to knock. Then hesitated. Something told me that the normal rules of social etiquette didn't apply here. Instead, I grasped the tarnished brass doorknob and turned it slowly. To my surprise, it moved easily under my hand. The door swung open with a long, drawn-out groan that set my teeth on edge. The interior of the house was cloaked in shadow, but as our eyes adjusted, shapes began to emerge from the gloom. Dusty furniture draped in white sheets, cobwebs hanging from the ceiling, and everywhere the musty smell of age and neglect. We stepped inside, the floorboards creaking ominously beneath our feet. The door swung shut behind us with a dull thud that sounded horribly final. For a moment we stood in silence, straining our ears for any sound that might indicate we weren't alone. But the only noise was the faint crackling of the bonfire outside and the rapid beating of our own hearts. Then from somewhere deep within the house came a sound that made my blood run cold, the long melodic whistle that had haunted us through the forest and empty streets. We weren't alone in the house after all, and whatever was in here with us had been waiting for us to arrive. The whistle hung in the air, its final note seeming to vibrate through the very walls of the old house. We stood frozen in the entryway, our bodies tense, ready to flee at the slightest provocation, but flee to where? Flowers of the forest and the empty streets suddenly seemed preferable to whatever awaited us in the depths of this decrepit dwelling. "We should go," Tom whispered, his voice cracking with fear. "Right now." This was a mistake. But before anyone could respond, a new sound filled the air. It was faint at first, barely perceptible over the pounding of my own heart. But it grew steadily louder, a mechanical grinding punctuated by clicks and whirs. "What is that?" Lena asked. Her eyes wide in the gloom. As if in answer, lights flickered to life around us. Not the harsh glare of modern bulbs, but the warm, uneven glow of gas lamps. They sputtered and hissed as they came to life, casting long, dancing shadows across the walls. With the new illumination, I could finally take in our surroundings properly. We stood in a grand foyer, its former elegance now faded and tarnished by time. A wide staircase swept up to the second floor, its banister thick with dust. ornate wallpaper peeling in places depicted scenes of a hunt, men on horseback pursuing a stag through dark woods. But as I looked closer, I realized with a chill that in some of the scenes it was the stag that seemed to be hunting the men. The grinding sound was coming from a large grandfather clock that stood against one wall, its pendulum swinging with hypnotic regularity. But when I looked at its face, I saw that the hands were spinning backward at an impossible speed. "This isn't right," Kiara murmured, her unseeing eyes darting back and forth as if trying to take in sounds that only she could hear. The air felt wrong, like it was too thick, too old. She was right. Each breath felt heavy, as if the air was saturated with the weight of years. Memories of things long past, but not forgotten. The door slammed somewhere above us. The sound reverberated through the house like a gunshot. We all jumped, huddling closer together instinctively. "Hello?" I called out, immediately regretting it as my voice echoed in the cavernous space. "Is anyone there?" For a long moment, there was no response. Then, so faintly that I thought I might have imagined it, came a child's laughter. It was followed by the patter of small running feet, moving from somewhere upstairs to directly over our heads. "Okay, that's it," Ryan said, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. "We're leaving." He turned toward the front door, reaching for the handle. But as his fingers touched the tarnished brass, the lamps flickered and went out, plunging us back into darkness. In the sudden blackness, I felt something brush past me. It was like a cold wind, carrying with it the scent of decay and the whisper of forgotten voices. I stumbled back with a startled cry, colliding with someone, Lena, I think, who let out a frightened yelp. Then, as suddenly as they had gone out, the lamps flared back to life. But the foyer had changed. The dust and cobwebs were gone. The wallpaper was vibrant and new, depicting its unsettling hunting scenes in vivid detail. And the air was filled with music. The tinkling notes of a piano drifting from a room to our left. "What's happening?" Ton's voice was barely above a whisper, his eyes wide as he took in our transformed surroundings. Before I could even begin to formulate a response, a figure appeared at the top of the stairs. It was a woman dressed in the style of the early 1900s. Her high-collared dress rustled as she descended toward us. Her face was pale, her eyes dark and sunken. "You were late," she said, her voice carrying a hint of reproach. "The others are already here. Come, he's waiting for you in the study." She gestured toward a door on our right, apparently oblivious to our modern clothing or the looks of abject terror on our faces. "Ma'am," I started, trying to keep my voice steady. "I think there's been a mistake, we're not." But she cut me off with a sharp gesture. "No time for excuses. You know how he hates to be kept waiting, especially on a night like this." With that, she turned and glided away, disappearing through the door at the far end of the foyer. We stood in stunned silence for a moment, trying to process what we had just witnessed. Was this some kind of elaborate hallucination? A shared delusion brought on by fear and exhaustion? Did that just happen? Lena asked, her voice shaking. "Tell me I'm not going crazy." "If you are, we all are," Ryan replied grimly. Kara's grip on my arm tightened. "Something's very wrong here," she whispered. "I can feel it. This place, it's not just a house, it's something else." As if to punctuate her words, the whistle sounded again. But this time it seemed to come from everywhere at once, from the walls, the floor, and the very air around us. And underlying it was that same cruel laughter we had heard in the forest and the empty streets. We were trapped in a nightmare, caught between the horrors that had chased us here and whatever malevolent force held sway over this impossible house. And as the whistle faded, leaving behind an expectant silence, I knew we had no choice but to press on. "The study," I said, my mouth dry with fear. I think we need to go to the study." It was a terrifying prospect, stepping further into this house of impossibilities. But somehow I knew that our only hope of understanding what was happening and possibly finding a way out lay through that door. "Are you insane?" Tom hissed, his eyes wild with panic. "We can go deeper into this madhouse." "We don't have a choice," I replied, trying to project confidence I didn't feel. "Whatever's happening here, whatever brought us to this place, I think we need to see it through." Ryan nodded grimly. "He's right, we're already in too deep. Our only way out is through." Lena and Kara exchanged a look, a silent communication born of years of sisterhood. Then Lena spoke, her voice quiet but determined. "We're with you, all of us, together." Tom looked like he wanted to argue further, but something in our faces must have convinced him. He deflated visibly, his shoulders slumping in resignation. "Fine, but if we die horribly, I'm blaming all of you in the afterlife." With our decision made, we turned as one towards the door the spectral woman had indicated. It loomed before us, the dark wood seeming to absorb the lamplight. As we approached, I could have sworn I saw shapes moving in the grain of the wood, twisted faces and grasping hands that vanished when I blinked. My hand trembled as I reached for the doorknob. The metal was ice cold to the touch, sending a shock up my arm. For a moment I hesitated, but then Kara's hand found mine, her touch anchoring me to reality, or what passed for reality in this nightmarish place. With a deep breath, I turned the knob and pushed the door open. The study beyond was dimly lit by a crackling fireplace and several oil lamps. Bookshelves lined the walls, their shelves sagging under the weight of ancient leather-bound tomes. A massive desk dominated the center of the room, its surface cluttered with papers, strange artifacts, and what looked disturbingly like human bones. But it was the figure behind the desk that commanded our attention. A man, if you could even call him that, sat in a high-backed leather chair. He was impossibly tall and thin, his limbs too long and jointed in all the wrong places, his skin pale as milk stretched tight over a face that was more skull than flesh. Then his eyes were pits of absolute darkness, seeming to draw in what little light there was in the room. When he spoke, his voice was like gravel being ground underfoot, each word sending shivers down my spine. "The final guests arrive," he said, lips peeling back to reveal teeth that were far too sharp to be human. "Please come in. We've been waiting for you." As if pulled by invisible strings, we found ourselves moving into the room. The door swung shut behind us with a finality that made my heart sink. "No. What are you?" I managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. The thing behind the desk tilted its head at an unnatural angle, regarding us with those bottomless eyes. I've been called many things over the centuries, the whistler, the night haunter, the one who walks between, but you may call me the caretaker. He gestured with a hand that had far too many fingers, indicating a group of chairs arranged before the desk. "Please, sit. We have much to discuss." As we hesitantly took our seats, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were mice voluntarily walking into a trap. The caretaker's gaze swept over each of us in turn, lingering on Carr for a moment longer than the rest. "Interesting," he murmured. "One who cannot see yet sees more clearly than most. You've brought me quite the intriguing group, my dear." This last was directed at a shadowy corner of the room, where I now noticed the woman from the foyer standing silently. "Now then," the caretaker continued, steepling his grotesquely elongated fingers, "I'm sure you have questions why you're here, what this place is, what I am. But before I get to that, I need you to understand something very important." He leaned forward, his face entering a pool of lamplight that did nothing to soften its horrifying features. "You are not here by accident. You were chosen, called, and now you face a choice that will determine not just your fates, but the fates of countless others." A chill ran through me at his words. I wanted to speak, to demand answers, but my voice seemed frozen in my throat. It was Kara who finally broke the silence, her unseeing eyes fixed unerringly on the caretaker's face. "What choice?" she asked, her voice steady despite the fear I could see etched in every line of her body. The caretaker's mouth stretched into what might have been a smile on a human face. On him, it was a rictus of otherworldly glee. "Why, my dear, the choice to become like us, of course, to shed your mortal coils and embrace the night eternal, to become the hunters instead of the hunted." As his words sank in, I felt a wave of nausea wash over me, the laughter we had heard in the woods, the whistle that had haunted our steps. It had all been leading to this moment, this impossible choice. "And if we refuse?" Ryan asked. His voice tight with barely controlled anger, the caretaker's smile widened, revealing row upon row of needle-sharp teeth. "Then you become part of the hunt, a different capacity. After all, every predator needs prey." In that moment, as the full horror of our situation became clear, I realized that our ordeal in the woods had been just the beginning. The real nightmare was only just starting. The decisions we made in this room would haunt us, one way or another, for the rest of our lives. Or perhaps for all eternity. The silence that followed the caretaker's proclamation was deafening. I could hear the rapid, shallow breathing of my friends, smell the acrid stench of fierce sweat that permeated the air. The crackling of the fire in the hearth seemed unnaturally loud, each pop and hiss making us flinch as if it were a gunshot. "This is insane," Tom finally sputtered, breaking the silence. "You can seriously expect us to believe any of this? Eternal night, hunters, this has to be some kind of sick joke or a hallucination or something." The caretaker's gaze settled on Tom, and I saw my friend physically recoil from those bottomless eyes. "Oh, I assure you, young Thomas, this is no joke, nor is it a hallucination. This is reality, a deeper, darker reality than the one you've known. But reality nonetheless." A chill ran through me at the casual use of Tom's name. How did this thing know who we were? As if reading my thoughts, the caretaker's lipless mouth twisted into another grotesque smile. "I know all about you, all of you." Rebecca, the self-appointed leader, always putting on a brave face even as doubt gnaws at your insides. Kara, blind to the physical world, but gifted with a sight that goes beyond the veil. Lena, fiercely protective of your sister, willing to face any danger for her. Ryan, the skeptic, always searching for a logical explanation even in the face of the impossible. And Thomas, hiding your fear behind humor. Desperate to believe this is all some elaborate prank with each name, each eerily accurate description, I felt my grip on reality slipping further. This couldn't be happening. And yet, what exactly are you offering? Kara asked, her voice steady despite the trembling I could feel in her body next to mine. "And what's the catch?" The caretaker leaned back in his chair, regarding Kara with what almost looked like respect. "Straight to the point. I appreciate that." He gestured expansively with one elongated hand. "What I offer is power beyond your wildest dream. The ability to move unseen through the night, to command the shadows themselves. Strength, speed, and senses far beyond mortal limits. And yes, a form of immortality. At the cost of our humanity," Luna interjected her voice sharply. "Humanity," the caretaker scoffed. "A fragile, fleeting thing. I offer you the chance to transcend such limitations," he said. "And if I refuse?" Ryan asked, echoing his earlier question. The caretaker's expression darkened. The shadows in the room seemed to deepen in response to his mood. "Then, as I said, you become part of the hunt. Prey to be pursued and consumed. Your fear, your pain, your very essence feeding those who made the wiser choice." I felt sick to my stomach. The choice before us was no choice at all. Become monsters or become victims. I opened my mouth to speak, though I had no idea what I was going to say when Kara's voice cut through the heavy silence. "You're lying," she said, her unseeing eyes fixed unerringly on the caretaker's face. "Not about what you're offering, but about our option. There's something you're not telling us." For the first time since we'd entered the room, the caretaker looked unsettled. He leaned forward, those terrible eyes narrowing as he studied Kara. "Fascinating," he murmured. "You see far more than you should, little one. Perhaps too much for your own good." "What isn't he telling us, Kara?" I asked, squeezing her hand encouragingly. Kara tilted her head as if listening to something none of the rest of us could hear. "There's a third option. Something to do with the house itself. It's hungry somehow, but not like him. It's waiting." The caretaker hissed, a sound like steam escaping a valve. The shadows in the room writhed and twisted, and for a moment I could have sworn I saw other shapes moving within them. Elongated limbs, grasping hands, hungry mouths. "Clever girl," he snarled, all pretense of civility gone. Too clever by half. "Yes, there is another option, one that neither you nor I would survive." "What is it?" Lena demanded, her arm protectively around her sister's shoulders. "Tell us." The caretaker rose from his chair, unfolding to a height that should have been impossible in the confines of the room. Yet somehow the ceiling seemed to stretch to accommodate him. Walls bowing outward as reality itself walked around his presence. "This house," he said, his voice resonating with otherworldly power, "is more than just a building. It is a nexus, a meeting point between worlds. It hungers for souls, for memories, for the very essence of those who enter it. And it has been waiting for centuries for the right souls to come along." He turned his terrible gaze on each of us in turn. "You five, you have the potential to feed it in a way no others have. Your bonds of friendship, your fears, your hopes and dreams, they are a feast that is long awaited. If you were to offer yourselves willingly to the house, it would consume us all, myself included, and sell the breach between worlds." "And what would happen to us?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The caretaker's face twisted into an expression that might have been regret on a human visage. "You would cease to exist as you are now. Your essences would become one with the house, your memories and experiences feeding it for eternity. And in doing so, you would prevent countless others from facing the choice you now face. You would end the hunt once and for all." The weight of his words settled over us like a shroud. The choice before us was impossible: become monsters, victims, or sacrifice ourselves to an eldritch abomination disguised as a house. And yet, a choice had to be made. As I looked around at my friends, I saw the same realization dawning on their faces. We had come into these woods seeking adventure and answers to the unknown. Now we faced a decision that would not only determine our fates, but potentially those of countless others. The caretaker watched us with those bottomless eyes, the shadows writhing around him in anticipation. And in the silence of that impossible room, with the weight of worlds pressing down upon us, we knew that whatever we decided, our lives and deaths would have meaning far beyond anything we could have imagined. The choice was ours. As the house creaked and groaned around us, as if impatiently awaiting our decision, I knew that the time had come to make it. The weight of the choice before us was suffocating. I looked at each of my friends in turn, seeing the fear, confusion, and dawning resolve in their eyes. We had entered these woods as carefree adventurers, seeking a thrill and perhaps a brush with the unknown. We stood on the precipice of a decision that would change not just our lives, but potentially the fabric of reality itself. "We need to discuss this," I said. My voice sounded strange and distant to my own ears. "Alone." The caretaker's lipless mouth twisted into what might have been a smirk on a human face. "By all means," he said, gesturing toward a door that I could have sworn wasn't there a moment ago. "Take all the time you need, but remember, the night grows old, and with it, your window of choice narrows." We didn't need to be told twice. As one, we rose and moved toward the door, half expecting it to vanish or transform into something monstrous. But it opened easily at my touch, revealing a small, dimly lit sitting room beyond. As soon as we were all inside, the door swung shut behind us with a soft click. The sounds from the study, the crackling fire, the caretaker's rasping breath were instantly muffled as if we had stepped into a different world entirely. For a long moment we simply stood there, each lost in our own thoughts. It was Kara who finally broke the silence. "We can't accept his offer," she said, her unseeing eyes somehow managing to meet each of ours in turn, becoming whatever he is. "It would mean losing everything that makes us human." Tom nodded vigorously, agreed. "I'd rather die as myself than live forever as some kind of monster." "But if we refuse," Lena said softly, "we become prey, and not just us, but who knows how many others after us. Can we condemn innocent people to that fate?" Ryan, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, finally spoke up. "What about the third option, sacrificing ourselves to the house?" A heavy silence fell over the room as we contemplated that possibility. It was horrifying to consider the annihilation of our very selves, our essences scattered and absorbed into the fabric of this eldritch dwelling. And yet, it would end the cycle, I said slowly, the words feeling like lead on my tongue.
No more hunts, no more innocent people being forced into impossible choices.
"Well, what cost?" Tom argued, his voice rising with a note of hysteria. "Our lives, our souls, everything we are or ever could be." Kara reached out, finding Tom's hand and squeezing it gently. "Sometimes," she said softly, "the greatest acts of heroism are the ones no one ever knows about." I felt a chill run down my spine at her words. She was right, of course. If we chose to sacrifice ourselves to the house, there would be no glory, no recognition. We would simply cease to be. Our families would never know what happened to us. We would become another tragic statistic. 5 young people who went into the woods and never came out. But we would save others from facing this nightmare. We would close whatever breach in reality had allowed entities like the caretaker to prey on our world. "It's not just about us anymore," Lena said, voicing what we were all thinking. "We have a responsibility now, knowledge we can't unknow." Ryan nodded slowly. "The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few," he quoted. A wry smile twisting his lips. "Never thought I'd be using Star Trek logic to contemplate sacrificing myself to an extra-dimensional house entity, but here we are." A laugh bubbled up in my throat, equal parts humor and hysteria. Soon we were all laughing, the sound tinged with desperation and fear, but also a strange sort of acceptance. In that moment I knew what our decision would be. I could see it in the set of Kara's jaw, the determined glint in Lena's eyes, the resigned slump of Tom's shoulders, and the grim nod Ryan gave me. We were gonna do it. We were gonna sacrifice ourselves to save others. As our laughter faded, replaced by a solemn silence, I took a deep breath. "Are we all agreed then?" I asked, needing to hear it spoken aloud. One by one they nodded. Kara and Lena clasped hands. Tom straightened his spine, squaring his shoulders as if preparing for battle. Ryan met my eyes, a silent understanding passing between us. With our decision made, we returned to the study to confront the caretaker. He seemed to sense our resolve immediately, his inhuman features twisting in a mix of surprise and what might have been respect. We declared our choice to sacrifice ourselves to the house, to end the cycle of terror once and for all. The caretaker's reaction was a mix of rage and fear. He attempted to dissuade us, alternating between threats and promises of power, but our unity gave us strength and we stood firm in our decision. As we committed to our choice, the house itself seemed to come alive around us. The walls pulsed with an otherworldly energy, and we could feel the very fabric of reality straining. The caretaker made one last desperate attempt to stop us, revealing his true form, a nightmarish amalgamation of shadow and teeth. But it was too late. The house had accepted our offer. We joined hands, forming a circle in the center of the room. As the house's hunger enveloped us, we each experienced flashes of our lives, memories, regrets, and moments of joy. We felt our very essences being pulled apart and absorbed into the structure around us. The caretaker's screams of defiance turned to terror as he too was consumed. The breach between worlds began to close, reality knitting itself back together. In our final moments of consciousness, we felt a profound sense of peace. We had faced the unknown and made the ultimate sacrifice, though the world would never know of our choice. We had saved countless lives from the horrors we had faced. As our individual awareness faded, merging with the house and with each other, we knew that our bond, the friendship that had brought us to these woods and given us the strength to make this choice, would endure in some form for eternity. The house settled, the breach closed, and silence fell over the woods once more. To the outside world, it would seem as though we had simply vanished without a trace. But in the whisper of the wind through the trees, in the play of shadows on moonlit nights, something of us would always remain, a testament to the power of friendship, sacrifice, and the courage to face the darkness, no matter the cost. My name is Brady, and I'm about to tell you about the night that changed everything. It was just yesterday, but it feels like a lifetime ago. My hands are shaking as I type this, and every shadow in my room seems to hide unspeakable horrors. But I need to get this down to try to make sense of what happened. I'm a freshman in high school, caught in that awkward phase between childhood and adulthood. You know how it is, one minute you're laughing at stupid jokes with your friends. The next you're facing terrors you never knew existed. It was a Saturday and the school year was winding down. The air buzzed with anticipation. Summer vacation was so close we could almost taste it. But there was something else in the air too, a tension I couldn't quite put my finger on. Looking back, I wonder if it was a warning, a premonition of what was to come. I have this tradition. Every year, as school's ending, I invite my best friend Gavin over for a sleepover. It's our thing, a night to forget about exams and parents and all the pressures of being teenagers. We stay up late, gorge ourselves on junk food, and go for walks in my neighborhood where the world is quiet, and it feels like we're the only ones alive. Gavin and I have been inseparable since 5th grade. We're into the same stuff, urban exploration, conspiracy theories, pushing boundaries. He gets me in a way no one else does, or at least I thought he did. After last night, I'm not sure I know anything anymore. I sent him the usual text. Hey Gavin, sleep over this Saturday. Usual night walk. His response came quickly. You know it? Can't wait. Simple words. Normal words. How could we have known they were setting in motion events that would plunge us into a nightmare? As I put my phone down, a chill ran down my spine. It was quick, barely noticeable, but intense enough to make me shudder. For a moment, the shadows in my room seemed to deepen, to move in ways they shouldn't. I blinked and everything was back to normal. I brushed it off as imagination, maybe excitement for the night ahead. If only I'd paid attention to that feeling. If only I'd canceled the sleepover, stayed home, stayed safe. But I didn't. Instead, I started planning for what I thought would be just another fun night with my friend. The week crawled by each day, seeming longer than the last. Strange things kept happening. Locker doors slammed shut on their own, whispers echoed in empty hallways, and glimpses of something tall and thin caught the corner of my eye. Each time I convinced myself it was nothing, stress from exams, lack of sleep, and overactive imagination. By the time Saturday rolled around, I was a bundle of nerves disguised as excitement. My parents were cool with the sleepover. They knew Gavin well and trusted us. If only they knew what we were about to stumble into. Gavin showed up at 7 p.m., his backpack stuffed with snacks and horror movies, but there was something off about him. His smile seemed forced. His eyes darted around nervously. "You okay, man?" I asked as we headed up to my room. He hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Yeah, just had a weird feeling all week." probably nothing. I felt a knot form in my stomach. He'd felt it too, but neither of us said anything more. We were tough guys after all. Didn't get spooked by weird feelings. As night fell, we settled into our usual routine. Video games, movies, enough junk food to make us sick. But there was an undercurrent of tension, a sense that something was building, waiting to break loose. Around midnight, that familiar restlessness set in. It was time for our walk. As we snuck out of the house, the cool night air hit us, carrying with it a scent I couldn't quite place. Old, musty, like decay and damp earth. Gavin must have smelled it too. He wrinkled his nose, looking around warily. Worth it tonight? I hesitated. I had an idea, one that had been forming all week. It was risky, possibly stupid, but the pull was irresistible. I was thinking, I said slowly, we could check out my old house. You know, the one in the woods? Gavin's eyes widened. I went down that creepy lane. Dude, that's like an hour's walk from me. Yeah, but think about it. We've never gone that far before. It could be interesting. There was a moment of silence. I could see the conflict in Gavin's eyes, fear warring with curiosity. Finally, he nodded. All right, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Let's do it. And so we set off, two foolish boys walking into the unknown. With each step away from the safety of my neighborhood, the night seemed to grow darker, the shadows deeper. The air grew thick with tension, anticipation, and something else. Something ancient and malevolent. We were crossing a line, stepping into a world we weren't prepared for. And what waited for us in those woods would change us forever. As we left the familiar streets of our neighborhood behind, the world around us seemed to shift. The comfortable glow of streetlights gave way to the pale, eerie light of a moon partially obscured by clouds. The air grew colder, carrying a damp, earthy scent that made me think of graveyards and hidden things. Brady, Gavin whispered, his voice tight with tension. Are you sure about this? I wasn't. Not really. But something was pulling me forward, an irresistible force that I couldn't explain. Yeah, I lied, trying to sound confident. It'll be fine. We walked in silence, the only sounds being footsteps and the occasional rustle of wind through the trees. As we neared the old rocky lane that led to my former home, the shadows seemed to deepen, moving in ways that defied logic. The lane stretched before us, a pale ribbon cutting through fields of stubbled corn. In the daylight, it would have been mundane, even boring, but now, under the watchful eye of the moon, it felt like a threshold to another world. Our pace slowed as we stepped onto the gravel. Each crunch under our feet sounded like a gunshot in the stillness of the night. I felt exposed, vulnerable, as if unseen eyes were watching our every move. You hear that? Gavin suddenly asked, freezing in place. I stopped, straining my ears. At first there was nothing but the sound of our breathing and the faint whisper of wind. Then I heard it, a low rhythmic sound like footsteps, but not quite. It was as if something was dragging itself along the ground, always just out of sight. It's probably just an animal, I said, not believing my own words. We pressed on, but the sound persisted, sometimes fading away only to return louder than before. By the time we reached the tree line at the end of the lane, we were both on edge, jumping at every snapping twig and rustling leaf. The woods loomed before us, a wall of darkness that seemed to swallow all light. As we stepped under the canopy of trees, the temperature dropped noticeably. The air became thick, almost oppressive, filled with the musty scent of decay. Brady, Gavin said, his voice barely audible. Maybe we should go back. Claude and me wanted to agree and run back to the safety of my home and forget this foolish adventure. But that inexplicable pull was stronger than ever. We've come this far, I said. Let's keep going just a little further. We pushed deeper into the woods, the path becoming less distinct with each step. The trees pressed in around us, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers, and all the while that strange dragging sound continued, always just behind us, always just out of sight. Then, without warning, the woods fell silent. The wind died away, leaving an unnatural stillness in its wake. Even our footsteps seemed muffled, as if the very air was absorbing all sound. That's when we heard it, a woman's scream, high and piercing, filled with terror and pain. It echoed through the trees, seeming to come from everywhere at once. Gavin and I froze, our eyes wide with horror. The scream lasted for several agonizing seconds, then abruptly morphed into something else. A deep, guttural growl that no human throat could produce. It was a sound of hunger, of rage, of something ancient and malevolent. "Run!" I yelled, my voice cracking with fear. We bolted, crashing through the underbrush, branches whipping at our faces. The growl grew louder, accompanied by the sound of something large moving through the forest behind us. Whatever it was gaining on us. In a moment of panic, I glanced over my shoulder. What I saw in that split second turned my blood to ice. A figure stood among the trees, impossibly tall and thin. Its limbs were too long, bent at unnatural angles, and its eyes two pinpricks of light that seemed to bore into my soul. We ran faster than I thought possible, our lungs burning, hearts pounding. The rocky lane appeared ahead, and we sprinted towards it, the sound of pursuit never far behind. As I burst out of the tree line onto the lane, I risked another look back. The figure stood at the edge of the forest, motionless, its eyes still fixed on us, gleaming with predatory intensity. We didn't stop running until we reached the end of the lane, collapsing onto the familiar pavement of our neighborhood streets. As we lay there, gasping for breath, the reality of what we experienced began to sink in. What was that thing? Gavin panted, his face pale and streaked with sweat. I shook my head, unable to form words. The image of that creature was burned into my mind, its inhuman eyes still watching me even now. We made our way back to my house in silence, jumping at every shadow and sound. Neither of us slept that night. We sat in my room, lights blazing, jumping at every creak of the house settling. As dawn broke, Gavin left, both of us making weak promises to talk later. But we both knew things would never be the same between us. We had seen something that defied explanation, something that shattered our understanding of the world. In the days that followed, we tried to rationalize what had happened. Maybe it was a prank or hallucination brought on by fear and exhaustion. But deep down, we knew the truth. Something was out there in those woods. Something ancient and hungry. I've thought about going to the police, but what would I say? Who would believe us? So I sit here typing out this account, hoping that somehow putting it into words will help me make sense of it all. And every night as darkness falls, I find myself staring out my window towards the woods where my old house stands. And sometimes, just at the edge of my vision, I see a tall, thin figure watching me, waiting. And I know with a certainty that chills me to my core that one day, it will come for me. The woods are no longer just woods. They're a threshold to something darker, something hungry, and we, in our foolish curiosity, open a door that can never be fully closed. The days following our terrifying encounter in the woods were a blur of sleepless nights and paranoid days. Gavin and I barely spoke, each of us retreating into our own worlds of fear and doubt. When we passed each other in the school hallways, our eyes would meet for a brief moment, filled with a shared understanding of the horror we'd witnessed before looking away quickly. The nightmares started on the third night. I found myself back in those woods, the trees pressing in around me, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers trying to grab me. And always there was that tall, thin figure lurking just at the edge of my vision. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, my heart pounding with the echo of that inhuman growl still ringing in my ears. A week after our encounter, Gavin finally broke the silence. He cornered me after class, his eyes darting nervously around the crowded hallway. "Brady," he whispered hoarsely, "we need to talk about what happened." I nodded, feeling a mix of relief and dread. We agreed to meet at the local diner after school, a public place where we felt safer, less exposed. The diner was nearly empty when we arrived, just a couple nursing cups of coffee at the counter. We slid into a booth at the far end, ordering sodas we knew we wouldn't drink. "I can't sleep," Gavin said without preamble, his fingers drumming nervously on the table. "Every time I close my eyes, I see that thing." I nodded, understanding all too well. "Me too. And sometimes when I'm looking out my window at night, I think I see it at the edge of the woods watching me." Gavin's eyes widened. "You've seen it again? Do you think it followed us?" The thought had crossed my mind, sending chills down my spine every time. I don't know, maybe we're just paranoid. We fell into silence, each lost in our own thoughts. The waitress came by with our untouched sodas, giving us a concerned look before moving away. "We need to go back," Gavin said suddenly, his voice barely above a whisper. I stared at him, sure I had misheard. "What? Are you insane?" He leaned forward, his eyes intense. "Think about it, Brady. Whatever that thing was, it's real. We both saw it. We can't just pretend it didn't happen. We need answers. And you think, well, we'll find them by going back to the place where we almost died." I hissed, anger and fear warring inside me. "Not at night," Gavin said quickly. "During the day, you'll be safer then. We can explore, maybe find some clues about what that thing is, where it came from." I wanted to refuse to tell Gavin he was crazy and that we should just try to forget the whole thing. But a part of me, the part that had always been drawn to mysteries and the unknown, was intrigued. And if I was honest with myself, I knew I'd never be able to move on, to feel safe again, until I had some answers. "Okay," I said finally, my mouth dry. "But we got prepared this time. But at the first sign of trouble, we get out of there. Deal?" Gavin nodded, relief evident on his face. "Deal." As we left the diner, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were making a terrible mistake. But it was too late to turn back now. We were committed to uncovering the truth, no matter where it led us. The next few days were a flurry of preparation. We gathered supplies, flashlights, batteries, a first aid kit, water bottles, and energy bars. I haven't even managed to borrow his dad's old hunting knife, though the thought of using it against whatever we'd seen in the woods seemed laughable. We also did research, spending hours in the library and online, looking for any information about the area where my old house stood. Most of what we found was mundane: property records, old newspaper articles about the development of the neighborhood. But then we stumbled upon something interesting. It was an old article buried deep in the archives of the local historical society, dated 1923. It told of a series of disappearances in the area. 5 people had vanished over the course of a month, all last seen near the woods where my old house now stood. The article was vague on details, but it mentioned strange sounds and unexplained phenomena reported by locals at the time. "This has to be connected," Gavin said excitedly as we huddled over the microfiche reader. "Maybe whatever took those people back then is the same thing we saw." I wasn't so sure. The idea that this entity, whatever it was, had been around for a century or more was terrifying, but I couldn't deny any coincidence. As we dug deeper, we found more unsettling information. The land had a dark history, it seemed. Native American legends spoke of it as a place of power, but also of danger. Early settlers had avoided it, telling stories of people who ventured into the woods and never returned. The more we learned, the more questions we had. What was this thing? Why had it been there for so long? And why had it revealed itself to us? The night before our planned expedition, I could barely sleep. Every creak of the house, every rustle of wind outside my window, set my nerves on edge. When I did finally drift off, my dreams were filled with dark woods and glowing eyes. Morning came too soon. I met Gavin at the end of my street, both of us carrying backpacks filled with our supplies. We told our parents we were going hiking, a half-truth. It sat uneasily in my stomach. As we set off towards the rocky lane, the bright sunlight and chirping birds seemed to mock the terror we'd experienced the night before. Even in the daylight, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were walking into something we couldn't possibly understand or control. "Ready?" Gavin asked as we reached the start of the lane. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak, and together we stepped onto the gravel, the crunching under our feet sounding like a countdown to something inevitable and terrifying. The rocky lane looked different in the daylight. The menacing shadows were gone, replaced by the warm glow of the morning sun. Fields of corn stretched out on either side, peaceful and ordinary. It was hard to believe that just a week ago this same path had been the site of our terrifying flight from an unknown horror. As we walked, Gavin kept up a steady stream of chatter, pointing out birds and plants, his voice a little too loud, a little too cheerful. I knew he was trying to keep our spirits up, to convince himself as much as me that we were just on a normal hike. But the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes darted constantly to the tree line ahead, betrayed his true feelings. We reached the edge of the woods faster than I expected. The trees loomed before us, their canopy creating a wall of shadow that seemed to push back against the sunlight. For a moment, we both hesitated, the memory of that night still fresh in our minds. "We don't have to do this," I said, giving Gavin one last chance to back out. He shook his head, his jaws set with determination. "We came this far, we need answers." Taking a deep breath, we stepped into the woods. The temperature dropped immediately, the air becoming cooler and damper. The sounds of the outside world, the rustling corn, the distant hum of traffic faded away, replaced by the soft crunch of leaves under our feet and the occasional call of a bird high in the trees. We moved slowly, our eyes scanning the forest floor for any sign of, well, we weren't sure what. Footprints, claw marks, some tangible evidence of the creature we'd seen. "Look," Gavin said suddenly, pointing to a nearby tree. I moved closer, my heart racing. There, about 7 feet up the trunk, were 3 deep gouges in the bark. They were long, easily the length of my forearm, and looked fresh. "Could be a bear," I said, not believing it for a second. Gavin shook his head. "Bears don't climb this high, and look at the spacing. Whatever made these has fingers-long ones." A chill ran down my spine as I remembered the impossibly long limbs of the figure we'd seen that night. We pressed on, now hyper-aware of our surroundings, jumping at every snapping twig and rustle of leaves. As we delved deeper into the woods, the trees seemed to press in closer, their branches intertwining overhead to block out more and more of the sky. The air grew thick and heavy, filled with the musty scent of decay. Always there was the feeling of being watched. We had been walking for about an hour when we stumbled upon the clearing. It was a perfect circle, maybe 30 feet across, completely devoid of trees or undergrowth. The ground was bare earth, hard-packed as if by countless feet. "This isn't natural," Gavin whispered, his voice tight with tension. I nodded, unable to speak. There was something wrong about this place, something that made my skin crawl and my heart race. As I stood at the edge of the clearing, I noticed something glinting in the center. Against my better judgment, I stepped forward, drawn by curiosity. As I got closer, I realized it was a small metal object, half buried in the dirt. I crouched down, brushing away the soil to reveal an old locket. As soon as my fingers touched the cool metal, a wave of dizziness washed over me. The world seemed to tilt and spin. At my terrifying moment, I wasn't in the clearing anymore. I was somewhere dark and cold, surrounded by the sound of dripping water and the faint echo of inhuman growls. Well, Beatty's voice snapped me back to reality. He was shaking my shoulder, his face pale with concern. "Are you okay?" We zoned out for a second there. I nodded. my mouth dry. "Yeah, I'm fine, just got a little lightheaded." I showed him the locket, careful not to touch it directly again. It was old, tarnished silver with an intricate design etched on its surface. When we pried it open, we found a faded photograph inside. A young woman with sad eyes, her clothes suggesting the picture was taken in the early 1900s. "Do you think she was one of the people who disappeared?" Gavin asked, his voice hushed. Before I could answer, a twig snapped somewhere in the woods behind us. We both whirled around, our hearts pounding. For a moment, everything was still. Then, from the depths of the forest came a low rumbling growl, the same sound we'd heard that night. "Run," I yelled, shoving the locket into my pocket. We bolted, crashing through the underbrush, all thoughts of stealth forgotten. The growl came again, louder this time, accompanied by the sound of something large moving through the forest behind us. We ran blindly, branches whipping at our faces and roots threatening to trip us with every step. I could hear Gavin's ragged breathing beside me, punctuated by quiet whimpers of fear. Just when I thought my lungs would burst, we burst out of the trade line onto the rocky lane. We didn't stop running until we reached the end, collapsing onto the familiar pavement of our neighborhood streets. As we lay there, gasping for breath, I pulled the locket from my pocket. In the bright sunlight, it looked ordinary, almost innocuous, but I knew it was anything but. Whatever was in those woods, whatever had been there for nearly a century, was connected to this small piece of silver. And now, for better or worse, we were connected to it too. The days that followed our daylight expedition were a whirlwind of research and increasingly bizarre occurrences. The locket became our focus, a tangible link to the mystery that had consumed our lives. We started by trying to identify the woman in the photograph. Hours were spent poring over old yearbooks and newspaper archives at the local library. Finally, after what felt like endless dead ends, we found a match. Her name was Eleanor Prescott, and she had been one of the 5 people who disappeared. The newspaper article we found described her as a vivacious young woman with a bright future ahead of her. She had last been seen walking near the woods on a sunny afternoon in June. No trace of her was ever found. But knowing her name only deepened the mystery. Why had her locket been in that clearing? And why, after nearly a century, did it still feel charged with some inexplicable energy? Strange things began to happen as we delved deeper into the mystery. Objects in my room would move when I wasn't looking. I'd wake up in the middle of the night to find my window open, even though I was sure I'd closed it before going to bed. And always there was the feeling of being watched. Gavin was experiencing similar phenomena. He told me about hearing whispers in empty rooms, seeing shadowy figures out of the corner of his eye. Once he woke up to find long, deep scratches on his bedroom wall, as if something with massive claws had tried to claw its way in. We were both on edge, jumping at every sound, suspicious of every shadow. Our parents noticed our strange behavior, but we brushed off their concerns with vague excuses about exam stress. The breaking point came about a week after our expedition. I was home alone trying to distract myself with homework when the power suddenly went out. As I fumbled for a flashlight, I heard it, that low rumbling growl coming from just outside my window. Heart pounding. I slowly turned towards the sound. There, pressed against the glass, was a face, but not a human face. It was elongated with 2 sharp teeth and eyes that glowed with an inner light. For a moment, we stared at each other, predator and prey. Then, with a sound like tearing metal, it was gone. I called Gavin immediately, my voice shaking as I recounted what I'd seen. He listened in silence, then said the words I'd been dreading. "We need to go back tonight." I wanted to refuse, to tell him he was crazy, but deep down I knew he was right. Whatever this thing was, it was escalating. We couldn't ignore it anymore. We needed answers, and we needed them now. We agreed to meet at midnight at the start of the rocky lane. As I hung up the phone, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were walking into a trap. But what choice did we have? As I prepared for what might be our final confrontation with the entity from the woods, I found myself thinking about Eleanor Prescott. Had she felt this same mix of terror and determination as she walked into those woods nearly a century ago? Had she known what awaited her? I tucked the locket into my pocket, its weight a constant reminder of the stakes we were facing. Whatever happened tonight, I silently promised Eleanor we would uncover the truth. We would put an end to this century-old mystery one way or another. Midnight found Gavin and me standing at the beginning of the rocky lane, our flashlights casting weak beams into the darkness ahead. The night was unnaturally still, no breeze stirring the leaves, no animals calling in the distance. It was as if the whole world was holding its breath, waiting to see what would unfold. "Are you sure about this?" I asked, giving Gavin one last chance to back out. He nodded, his face pale but determined in the moonlight. "We need to end this one way or another, Brady." Taking a deep breath, we stepped onto the lane. The crunch of gravel under our feet seemed unnaturally loud in the silence. With each step, the woods loomed closer, a wall of darkness that seemed to push back against our flashlight beams. As we made the tree line, I felt the locket grow warm in my pocket. I pulled it out, gasping as I saw it was glowing faintly, pulsing like a heartbeat. Gavin stared at it, his eyes wide. "It's never done that before," he whispered. Before I could respond, a low growl emanated from the woods. It was the same sound we heard before, but closer now, more hungry. We both froze, our flashlights darting from tree to tree, trying to catch a glimpse of the creature. "We should go back," I said, my voice shaking. But even as the words left my mouth, I knew it was too late. We were committed now. We stepped into the woods, and the trees immediately closed in around us. The air grew thick and heavy, filled with the musty scent of decay. My flashlight seemed to grow dimmer with each step, as if the darkness was actively fighting against them. We had been walking for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, when we stumbled into the clearing we had discovered during our daytime expedition. It looked different at night, more sinister. The bare earth seemed to absorb our flashlight beams, and the trees surrounding it loomed like silent sentinels. As we stepped into the clearing, the locket in my pocket grew almost painfully hot. I pulled it out, gasping as it burst open of its own accord. The photograph inside was glowing, Eleanor Prescott's eyes seeming to stare right at us. Suddenly, the air in the center of the clearing began to shimmer like heat waves rising from hot pavement. A figure began to materialize, tall and impossibly thin, with limbs that bent at unnatural angles. It was the creature we had seen that first night, but now we could see it clearly. Its skin was pale and translucent, stretched tight over a skeleton-like frame. Its face was elongated with sunken cheeks and a mouth full of needle-sharp teeth. But it was the eyes that held me transfixed, glowing with an inner light filled with intelligence that was decidedly inhuman. For a moment, everything was still. Then the creature spoke, its voice a raspy whisper that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "You've come back," it said, its mouth not moving. "After all these years, you've finally come back." Gavin and I exchanged confused glances. "What do you mean?" I asked, surprised I could even form words. The creature's head tilted to one side in an eerily human gesture. "You carry her with you," it said, its glowing eyes fixed on the locket in my hand. "The one who got away, the one who promised to return." With a jolt, I realized it was talking about Eleanor Prescott. She escaped from you?" I asked. A sound that might have been a laugh escaped the creature's throat. "Escaped? No, she made a bargain. Her freedom for a promise that she would return with others. That she would fight me." Horror washed over me as the implications of its words sank in. Eleanor hadn't been a victim, she had been an accomplice. She had led others to this creature over the years, sacrificing them to maintain her own freedom. But she grew old, the creature continued, its voice tinged with what might have been sadness. She died before she could fulfill her promise, and I have waited, hungry for so long. It took a step towards us, its movements jerky and unnatural. But now you're here, you brought her back to me, and you will take her place. Gavin and I backed away, our hearts pounding. It didn't make any bargain, Gavin said, his voice shaking. We don't owe you anything. The creature's mouth stretched into a grotesque approximation of a smile. You came into my woods. You woke me from my slumber. The bargain has already been made. It lunged forward with incredible speed. I felt a searing pain in my arm as its claws raked across my skin. Gavin yelled, swinging the flashlight like a club, but it passed right through the creature as if it were made of smoke. We turned to run, but the trees at the edge of the clearing had moved, forming an impenetrable wall. We were trapped. As the creature advanced, I felt the locket pulse in my hand. On instinct, I held it up, and a beam of brilliant white light burst forth, illuminating the clearing. The creature shrieked, recoiling from the light. In that moment, I understood. The locket wasn't just a keepsake. It was a weapon imbued with whatever power Eleanor had used to strike her bargain. Gavin, I shouted the locket. We need to destroy it. You looked at me like I was crazy. What? What? It's the source of its power, I said, dodging another swipe from the creature. If we destroy it, maybe we can end this. Gavin nodded, understanding dawning in his eyes. He reached into his backpack, pulling out the hunting knife his dad had lent him. The creature, realizing our intent, let out an ear-piercing shriek and lunged for us. But I was ready. I held up the locket, the beam of light holding the monster at bay. Now, Gavin, I yelled. With all his strength, Gavin brought the knife down on the locket. There was a blinding flash of light, a sound like 1,000 screams, and then silence. When my vision cleared, the creature was gone. The trees at the edge of the clearing had returned to their normal positions, and the locket lay on the ground, split in two. The photograph inside turned to ash. We stood there for a long moment, breathing heavily, unable to believe what had just happened. Then, without a word, we turned and ran, not stopping until we had left the woods far behind us. The days that followed our confrontation in the woods were a blur of sleepless nights and paranoid days. We told no one about what had happened, knowing that no one would believe us. How could we explain a century-old bargain, a creature that defied explanation, and a locket that held both doom and salvation? Slowly, life began to return to normal. The nightmares became less frequent. The feeling of being watched faded. But we were changed irrevocably. We had glimpsed a world beyond our understanding, faced a horror that most people couldn't even imagine. We never went back to those woods, but sometimes on dark nights when the wind whispers through the trees, I find myself thinking about Eleanor Prescott. I wonder about the bargain she made, about the lives she sacrificed to maintain her freedom, and I wonder if somewhere out there the creature is still waiting, still hungry. Gavin and I don't talk about that night much anymore, but there's an understanding between us, a shared secret that binds us together. We know that the world is stranger and more dangerous than most people realize. We know that sometimes the only way to face the darkness is to step into it, armed with nothing but courage in the hope that light will prevail. As I sit here writing this account, I can't help but feel that our story isn't over. The locket may be destroyed, the creature vanquished, but the mystery of those woods remains. What other secrets are hidden in the shadows of our world? What other bargains have been struck? What other horrors await discovery? I don't know if I'll ever have the courage to seek out those answers. Yet I do know this: the night we crossed the line, the night we faced the unknown, changed us forever. And somewhere, in the depths of those dark woods, something is waiting for the next foolish adventurers to stumble into its domain, waiting to strike another bargain. And so, I leave you with this warning. Be careful where you wander, be wary of the shadows. And if you ever find yourself on a long rocky lane leading into dark woods, turn back. Turn back before it's too late. Because some mysteries are better left unsolved, some lines better left uncrossed.